Chapter 1575. In the sky above the imperial city, both sides sent out Yuan venerate battle formations at the same time. The battle was getting more and more intense. The Xinyuan royal family's saber formation was originally responsible for exterminating the beast tide in the city. Suddenly, a beam of halberd radiance pierced through the sky and blasted the saber formation. The people within the formation were all shaken up and their movements were immediately hindered. Exterminate them! A peak Yuan venerate in charge of the saber formation shouted sternly as he looked at the halberd formation formed by Xiang Mo. All the members heard the command and simultaneously increased their source soul power to integrate it into the battle formation. The large formation resonated and erupted with a massive radiance. The figures within the formation were engulfed by the radiance and seemed to have disappeared entirely. What replaced it was a huge warblade that was shining coldly in the air. This warblade seemed to have condensed into a solid form. The power of every member was a part of this warblade. Surging saber chi burst forth as the warblade slashed down at Xiang Mo and the others. The void seemed to have been cut open as the saber light was incomparably sharp. Xiang Mo and the others didn't dare be careless. They all increased their soul power and a massive radiance engulfed everyone. It also seemed to have condensed into a substantial war halberd that lay across the sky. Then, its speed suddenly increased sharply as it whizzed forward and collided with the saber light that was slashing down. Clang! The sound of collisions reverberated in the air as the war halberd and the domineering saber slashed back and forth. The halberd light and the saber light intertwined, trying to shatter the other party and disintegrate the power of the people within the formation. Every time they clashed, someone in the formation would be injured. However, no one could do anything to the other for a while. When Xinyuan Gallian saw this, he waved his hand again and sent out a second Yuan venerate battle formation to provide assistance. However, the Zheng clan was already prepared. The Yuan venerate team, not far from Xiang Mo, immediately formed a formation. The formation light soared into the sky and intercepted them. Comparing teams? Xinyuan Gallian snorted. The Myriad Cultivator Alliance had yet to recover from the battle 3 years ago. There were only 2 Yuan venerate battle formations left. How could they compare to him? He ordered, send out 2 more formations and exterminate them. Whoosh! At his command, 2 of the remaining 7 Yuan venerate formations of the Xinyuan royal family broke away from the main army and transformed into a divine elephant and a giant axe as they charged into the battle. The divine elephant stomped down, causing the space to tremble. The 4 hooves of the elephant contained extremely overbearing weight of gravity. As the elephant stomped down, it crushed the halberd's head. Xiang Mo and the others felt as if the elephant's leg was crushing down on them like a mountain. Their bodies were bound by the gravity, and all the warriors in the matrix were unable to move for a while. It was at this moment that the tyrannical blade ruthlessly chopped down. Endless sharp light cut into the halberd, and a terrifying power invaded the array. Everyone's divine souls were impacted, and the soul power that was maintaining the array became unstable. With a cracking sound, dense cracks appeared on the halberd array, and it seemed like it would shatter at any moment. Dong! The divine elephant's 4 feet landed on the halberds. The great path of gravity of Xinyuan royal family pressed down in a frenzy, invading the halberd matrix once again. Xiang Mo and the others couldn't help but vomit blood at the same time, falling down one after another. From the outside, one could see a halberd falling from the sky to the ground. My grandson! Above the void outside the city, Xiang Bu, who was watching the battle, cried out in alarm. Being besieged by 2 Yuan venerate battle formations of the Xinyuan royal family, this blow was definitely not light. Unfortunately, his side didn't have any extra forces to go and help. Even the second Yuan venerate team that had gone out with Xiang Mo was besieged by the enemy and couldn't even fend for themselves. Qin Hao stood at the front of the warship and quietly observed the battle. Regardless of whether it was in terms of numbers or combat strength, the Zheng clan and the Xinyuan family weren't on par. It was normal for them to be suppressed. However, at this moment, he didn't say anything. This was because he didn't need to give any orders. Su Jin knew what to do. Whoosh! While Xiang Mo and the others were in trouble, the sound of a great path flute whizzed out from outside the city. The sound waves suffused with the radiance of laws enveloped the divine elephant and the blade array. The heavenly sound of the Yaowang Peak disciples resonated with heaven and earth. The laws entered their souls and invaded the battle formations without any hindrance, rushing into the minds of every member of the Xianyuan royal family. In an instant, the image of the divine elephant and the light of the tyrant blade dissipated at the same time. The two teams were immediately exposed. Countless people were covering their ears with their hands. Their faces were distorted, and their eyes were bloodshot. They looked extremely pained. The sound of the flute entered their ears and invaded their souls. They felt as if their bodies were being crushed by the power of heaven and earth. The sound of the flute wanted to shatter their souls. The power was too strong, and they simply couldn't resist it. Kill! Xiang Mo seized the opportunity and raised his soul power once again. He ignored the injuries in his body and formed a halberd with the others to attack. The halberd turned back and shot straight into the sky. The sharp blade aura pierced through the formation of blades and the group of divine elephants. Suddenly, countless people's bodies were torn apart by the formation light. Blood splashed out like rain. Just one attack had destroyed two teams of the same level on the spot. It was obvious how strong the interference of the sound techniques released by Su Jin and the others were. Men, kill that flute master for me. Xianyuan Gaoyan shouted angrily as he pointed in Su Jin's direction. Su Jin's interference was too wide. The sound of the flute permeated the air and covered the entire city. Whenever the Zheng clan showed signs of weakness, he would immediately use the music to forcefully interfere and turn the situation around. This person had to be eliminated as soon as possible. Otherwise, even if all the Yuan Venerate battle formations were mobilized, they would still be affected by the sound of the flute, and their combat strength would be reduced. Kill! In the void, an elder behind Xianyuan Gaoyan moved. Emperor Light wreaked havoc around his body as he descended like a meteor. A giant palm of energy shot towards Su Jin. The young man playing the flute had a half-step Yuan Emperor cultivation base. He had formed an emperor's body and wasn't someone an ordinary human ruler could match. After all, he had snatched the Grand Elder Yuegong's Emperor Tribulation. Even Changhe Lo had been defeated by him. Naturally, the Xianyuan family's emperor-level powerhouses had to be mobilized to successfully eliminate him. He's just a junior. Where's the dignity of the southern proud Emperor Xianyuan? Sword Emperor Makamanji said coldly to Xianyuan Gaoyan. Even an emperor-level elder had to be mobilized to kill a human ruler. I'm afraid that even your nephew Shou Wuk won't be a match for this person. Xianyuan Gaoyan retorted bluntly. Makamanji was mocking him? Which human ruler could snatch someone's Emperor Tribulation by force? That flute master clearly had the qualifications to become an emperor and had already seen through the emperor's path. He could probably summon the Emperor Tribulation at any time. If he didn't mobilize an emperor-level powerhouse, no one below the emperor level could be his match. This was a battlefield, not a friendly exchange between two factions. Xianyuan Gaoyan didn't care about Makamanji's mockery. It was fine as long as he could kill Su Jin. If it weren't for his dignity, he would have done it himself. Buzz! At that moment, the majestic palm of energy that pierced through the void crushed everything in its path. The dazzling light of rules lingered above, and the heavens trembled. It was as if this palm could bury the city below. Su Jin couldn't possibly block this attack. Fourth level, Emperor level. Qin Hao looked up and transmitted his voice to someone behind him. Uncle Zheng. Zheng Qingqi's father nodded. Emperor Light flashed around him as he soared into the sky. In an instant, a huge soul ship formed under his feet. He drove the ship forward and shouted at the Xianyuan royal family elder, "Old man, don't be arrogant." The two emperors attacked, and their auras were like thunder. Soon, they collided fiercely. The soul ship and the palm were destroyed at the same time, and there was a deafening roar. The light of different rules swept out violently, and the two were sent flying into the distance at the same time. You're quite powerful. Zheng Qingqi's father's legs were numb from the impact, and he stared at the elder opposite him. This elder's cultivation was 2 levels higher than his, and his soul power and primordial qi were denser. But for cultivators who could enter the Emperor realm, 2 levels wasn't a big difference. Even if they couldn't defeat the other party, they could at least hold him back and prevent the Xianyuan family cultivators from affecting the battle below the Emperor realm. Go again. Xianyuan Gaoyan waved his hand and gave a firm order. The flute master of the Zheng clan must be killed. Whoosh, whoosh. Including the one who attacked before, there were a total of 9 emperors. Excluding Xianyuan Wuba and Xianyuan Wuying, all the emperors were mobilized. Elders of the Night Luo Palace, listen to my orders. Protect our juniors, and don't show mercy to anyone who attacks. Yi Ninghong stepped on the 8-winged demon Oriole, and the Empress' radiance flickered as she gave the order. Good, very good. Xianyuan Gaoyan looked at Yi Ninghong and squeezed out the words from between his teeth. She was willing to go against the Xianyuan family at all costs. Today, the Zheng clan is defeated, and the Night Luo Palace will completely disappear from the southern region. But I'm very curious, do you still have any emperors in your sect? As far as he knew, apart from the Night Demon Emperor's mouth, the 8-winged demon Oriole, the strongest person in the Night Luo Palace was the former Grand Elder, a quasi-emperor. However, that great elder had already died in battle 3 years ago. Today, what could Yi Ninghong use to fight against the Xianyuan family? Yes or no? Open your eyes wide and look carefully. Yi Ninghong said coldly. Not long ago, there was indeed no one in her sect who had entered the Emperor realm. Not a single one. However, ever since Qin Hao suddenly returned with Miori, 4 emperors were born in the Night Luo Palace overnight. Those 4 people were originally at the peak of the Emperor realm, but they had been stuck in their realm for many years. They had never comprehended their own Emperor realm and were unable to take that step forward. Although they relied on the secret technique of the Supreme Divinity Senior to forcefully raise their cultivation and jump from the Emperor realm to the 3rd heaven of the Emperor realm. Moreover, there was no possibility of them improving their cultivation for the rest of their lives. This was the side effect of raising their cultivation base. However, for them, being able to enter the Emperor realm was their lifelong dream. As for becoming an Emperor Lord, the 4th elder had never thought about it. Moreover, the 4 of them were already old. If they still couldn't see through the Emperor realm, they wouldn't have many years left to live. Now that they suddenly became emperors, it was equivalent to extending their lifespan. Even if their cultivation base couldn't be improved and there was a trace of regret, their lives could already be considered perfect. Mortals cultivated martial arts, and many martial artists dreamed of becoming an emperor. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. While they were talking, on the battleship below, a group of figures flashing with emperor light rose into the air. Under Xianyuan Gaoyan's shocked expression, 4 white-haired old women blocked in front of Emperor Yuan of the Xianyuan family. At the same time, old ancestor Zheng waved his hand, and Emperor Yuan of the family rose up at the same time and joined Emperor Yuan of the Night Luo Palace. Including Zheng Qingqi's father, there were a total of 8 people. 8 against 9. Although Emperor Yuan was at a disadvantage in terms of numbers, he still had the power to fight. How can this be? Xianyuan Gaoyan was shocked. Emperors. In addition to Yi Ninghong, other emperors were born in the Night Luo Palace. Was this considered a blessing from the heavenly Tao? Xianyuan Gaoyan couldn't figure out where the emperors of the Night Luo Palace came from. If they broke through at the last minute, why didn't the family spies discover it? After all, breaking through to the Emperor realm would attract the Emperor Tribulation. However, during this period of time, the Emperor Tribulation didn't fall in the Night Luo Palace and the Zheng Dynasty. Chapter 1576. Emperors had to go through the Emperor Tribulation and refine their bodies before they could become emperors. Otherwise, their bodies would not be able to support the rules of the Great Path and control the power of heaven and earth. Once they released their Tao will, they would suffer a backlash and die. If the Night Palace did not send down the Emperor Tribulation, how could they refine their bodies? No one could answer Xin Yuan Gallian's question. Muri was a flawless great emperor, a third realm emperor. It was easy for her to reverse the heaven and earth anomaly of a few early-stage emperors. Makamanji and the encompassing emperor looked down and saw the few emperors of the Night Palace. Their eyes flashed with surprise, but more than that, they were envious. Showuk was Makamanji's nephew, and Luo Yuliang was the encompassing emperor's youngest son. They naturally knew some secrets that Xinyuan Gaoyan did not. For example, Miaoli was a super expert who had stepped into the third realm of Emperor Dao. The power of a supreme god can forcefully break through the emperor's Dao and pull a primitive emperor into the emperor realm. Mu Yunzong's heart was in turmoil. Was the third tier of the imperial path so powerful? He had proven his Dao and thought that he had reached the peak. However, Muri made him feel like he was looking at a mountain. It seemed that he still had a long way to go on the path of the Sword Dao. Or, after the battle was over, he could talk to the Supreme God and see if she could help him. At this moment, the encompassing emperor was gloating. He looked at Xinyuan Gaoyan. The Night Palace had produced 4 emperors out of nowhere. Including the Zheng clan, their emperors were enough to fight against him. There was no suspense in this battle. The Xinyuan family was doomed. The Emperor Xinyuan would die here. At this moment, the encompassing emperor's eyes flashed with ferocity. The resentment that had accumulated in his heart for many years seemed to be relieved. Xinyuan Gaoyan's death could comfort Yufei's soul in heaven. He had waited for this moment for too long. He also wanted to fight to the death with Nanao. However, the encompassing emperor did not expect Qin how to fulfill his wish and destroy the entire Xinyuan family. The encompassing emperor was impressed by the courage and determination of a junior and felt that he was inferior. High up in the sky, the 17 great emperors from both sides faced each other in the air. Balls of golden white emperor's light surged, causing the space to tremble. The destructive laws of the universe seemed to be able to cut the sky into countless pieces. Countless martial artists who came to watch the battle were shocked. It had been a long time since a battle between martial emperors had taken place in the southern region. Today, a life-and-death battle would take place in front of them. They didn't know how many Emperor Yuan would fall here, but they also felt that it was a pity. After all, no matter where he went in the continent, Emperor Yuan was definitely a powerful existence who was worshipped and revered by tens of thousands of people. Kill! Without any superfluous words, an elder of the Xinyuan clan roared. His palms formed a circle in the shape of a shield and weaved with the radiance of endless gravity. With a palm strike, the great path collapsed. The giant shield pressed down on Zheng Qingqi's father. The other emperors of the Xinyuan family also attacked one after another, each looking for an opponent. Everyone, be careful of one heart. Duanmu Qingwei shouted solemnly. His figure flickered, and with the Platinum Light Emperor, he rushed toward the 2 patriarchs of the Southern Pride sect. Now, he had also entered the martial emperor realm, but he wasn't forcefully promoted by Muri. Instead, his Dao foundation was deep, and he took advantage of the situation to become a first-stage martial emperor. The 2 patriarchs of his sect were also first-stage martial emperors. Qin Lao blocked the 2 of them by himself. Mr. Duanmu, get out of the way. We don't want to fight with you. One of them had white hair and a youthful face. He was dressed in tight-fitting clothes and was filled with the radiance of a sharp spear. Judging from his aura, he was obviously a martial emperor who was proficient in spear techniques. In this current situation, can I give way? Qin Lao replied. If he gave way, the battle situation in the city would change drastically because of the intervention of the martial emperors. I have no choice, sorry to offend you. Another long-bearded man sighed. He suddenly clenched his fists. A platinum radiance spread, and his fists gradually petrified, turning into stone fists that looked incomparably hard. These 2 people weren't from the Xinyuan family. It was only because their sect was located in the Southern Pride sect that they had received guidance from Xinyuan Gaoyan that they had no choice but to get involved in the conflict. They didn't want to be enemies with Qin Lao. After all, Qing Lao wasn't a nobody in the Southern Pride region. His cultivation was strong, and he was the only alchemist who was close to Denda's level. Today, he finally got what he wanted and became Dende. The two of them had long admired Qing Lao. If this battle didn't happen, they would have become good friends. Gather space into stone. The long-bearded man grabbed at the air. He had to attack even if he didn't want to. Otherwise, Xianyuan Gaoyan wouldn't let them off. He reached out a stone palm and grabbed at Qing Lao. An invisible power of rules spread forward at an extremely fast speed. Everywhere it passed, the space condensed into stone. Huge stones continuously crashed toward Duanmu Qinghui. It was extremely domineering. "Break!" Qing Lao shouted. Dilly condensed in his palm. His palm glowing with platinum light slashed down. It was comparable to the sharpest weapon in the world. With one slash, countless huge stones were split from the center and flew to the sides. The long-bearded man shook his head. Even though Duanmu Qinghui had entered the Emperor realm, he was obviously lacking in experience in a battle of the Emperor realm. How could his rules be broken so easily? Condense. He gave the order. The Emperor's light around the long-bearded man's body swept out. The countless broken stones in the air were all controlled and rushed towards Elder Qing. They were like scales that covered Elder Qing's body. In an instant, he was sealed in the air and turned into a stone statue. "Sorry, this is the only way to not harm your life." The long-bearded man looked at the white-haired Spear Emperor. "Take advantage of the opportunity." "Okay." The Spear Emperor nodded. He disappeared from his original position and turned into a dazzling spear light. It pierced through the void and landed in Su Jin's direction, wanting to kill him in one strike. However, Duanmu Qinghui, who had turned into a stone statue, disappeared at the same time. He suddenly appeared in the path of the spear light. The two sides collided. The power of the rule spear ruthlessly pierced the stone statue. There was a shocking explosion. Countless stones shot out in all directions. "You don't want to live anymore?" The long-bearded man's expression changed drastically. He was shocked. He had used the rules to seal Duanmu Qinghui because he didn't want the other party to interfere. However, Qing Lao still had the strength to move. He used his body to block the Spear Emperor's attack. When one's cultivation was sealed, one could imagine the consequences. Puff! Qing Lao vomited blood. It flowed on his chest. This spear pierced through his entire body. Even his spirit was injured by the rule of the spear. However, at the same time, this spear also disintegrated the rule of petrification on his body, freeing him from his imprisonment. "I said, I can't let you go," Duanmu Qinghui said. Duanmu Qinghui said, although the stone statue was destroyed, he was also injured by the rule spear while at the same time. "In your current state, you are no match for the two of us. Don't be stubborn." A trace of anger appeared on the long-bearded man's face. Even if he was not injured, Duanmu Qinghui could not possibly be a match for the two of them. Moreover, the petrification on Duanmu Qinghui's body was broken. However, his legs and hand were still sealed. "Haha, you have underestimated the old man." Duanmu Qinghui's eyes suddenly glowed with imperial light. A powerful platinum light swept out from his body and spread to his limbs. The rocks that stuck to the surface of his body disappeared layer by layer. It was as if they were swallowed by the imperial light and rolled into his body. When the imperial light dissipated, Duanmu Qinghui was as good as new. There was no longer any rock blocking his body. This is the rule of refinement. The long-bearded man's eyes narrowed. His expression changed slightly. "If we can't get past him, Xianyuan Gaoyan will not let us go. There is no need to hold back." The Spear Emperor gritted his teeth. He pointed into the void. A ray of imperial light turned into a divine spear of the Great Path. It pierced straight toward Qing Lao's chest. However, Qing Lao grabbed at the void. The power of the rules spewed forward and wrapped around the divine spear. The divine spear melted little by little. Before it even reached him, it had been completely refined. "So difficult. You have to force my hand." The long-bearded man knew that he could not hold back any longer. Duanmu Qinghui's rule power was a little powerful. It could actually refine the power of the will of others. There was a loud roar in the void. The long-bearded man's body grew rapidly. Layers of rocks continued to accumulate on his body. He used the power of the rule power on himself and turned into a stone giant in the blink of an eye. A mountain-like fist smashed down. It shook the void and slammed heavily toward Duanmu, Qinghui's head, spear breaking sun and moon. Seeing this, the Spear Emperor erupted with even more violent spear light. He pointed into the void again. Dilly condensed a divine spear that was hundreds of meters long. A terrible rule light lingered on it. His will drove the divine spear forward. Come down. Qing Lao let out a deep roar. He stretched out his palms, wanting to subdue the dragon and tiger. Majestic Dilly spewed out from his palms, sealing the space around him. Then, he turned sideways and avoided the Stone Emperor's fists. However, Dilly suddenly contracted. The space became narrow, firmly trapping the stone giant. If you let me go like this, both of us will suffer. The Stone Emperor looked at the hundreds of meters long divine spear flying toward him. He could not help but let out a panic cry. His towering body struggled wildly. Even the space was cracked. If both of us suffer, so be it. I have no choice. Dense blue veins appeared on Qing Lao's forehead. He used all his cultivation to release Dilly, firmly trapping the Stone Emperor in front of him. The Rock Emperor flew into a rage and let out a bestial roar. He stomped down in the air, and the Emperor Qi in his body surged crazily like a vast ocean. With the naked eye, the space around him began to condense into rocks. Strands of blood continued to flow from Duanmu Qinghui's mouth. The more the Stone Emperor struggled, the more serious the injuries he suffered from the invasion of the rules. He only felt that his vitality and soul power were flowing slower and slower. It was as if his meridians and internal organs had turned into dead objects. Even so, he did not retreat at all. Shurgondang, get out of the way. The Spear Emperor looked at the two people who were entangled and let out an anxious cry. Even he could not stop this full-strength spear. I also want to. Shurgondang replied with a sorrowful cry. Boom! The divine spear pierced through the void, and the great Tao of space collapsed. It first pierced the stone giant's body. At this moment, countless stone layers exploded, revealing the Stone Emperor's true body. At the same time, the spear light began to shrink rapidly. Under the backlash of the rules, it became normal size. However, the spear's momentum did not decrease. The sharp spear light continued to move forward, piercing through the Stone Emperor's body and piercing through his chest. It pierced into Qing Lao's body and flew out from his back. Then, the power of this spear completely disappeared. It turned into a tiny embroidery needle-like light and disappeared in the air. With a cry, the Stone Emperor and Qing Lao spat out blood at the same time. They trembled extremely violently. The light around their bodies was extinguished at the same time. Both of them fell into the city. Indeed, both sides were injured. Consider yourself unlucky. The Spear Emperor watched as the Stone Emperor fell. After being struck by his rule spear intent, even if he did not die, he would be severely injured. However, the Stone Emperor's sacrifice was not useless. At least he had pulled Duanmu Qinghui along with him. Now, no one was blocking him anymore. Die. The Spear Emperor swept his gaze down and stared viciously at Su Jin. After killing this flute master, his mission was completed. Even if he immediately withdrew from the battle, Xinyuan Gaoyan would no longer pursue his responsibility. Thinking of this, the Spear Emperor's body lit up again. Rule Dao intent lingered around his body. It looked like his body had turned into a peerless spear. His killing intent crazily enveloped downwards. He turned around and wanted to kill Su Jin under his spear. However, for some reason, the soul power in his body suddenly stagnated. He was actually unable to maintain the operation of the rules. At this moment, the Spear Emperor was horrified to discover that his hands and feet were gradually being climbed up by the rock layer. It continued to spread throughout his body. Even his meridians and internal organs were petrified at the same time. In the end, his head was also swallowed by the rock layer. He turned into a stone statue and fell into the city. Along with this, a curse towards the stone emperor sounded in the air. Brother Sure, thank you. Somewhere in the city, the heavily injured Duanmu Qinghui lay on the ground. A bloody hole was pierced through his back by a spear. He looked at a long-bearded man who was lying on the ground not far away. The man's injuries were not lighter than his. In fact, they were even more serious. After all, the Stone Emperor had suffered more injuries from the Spear Emperor. However, Qing Lao knew that if the Stone Emperor had not deliberately gone easy on him, he would not have been able to transfer the refined rock layer to the Spear Emperor with his cultivation base that had just stepped into the Emperor realm. It's nothing. It's not worth mentioning. By the way, shouldn't you give me a pill to treat me first? The Stone Emperor revealed a silly smile. Then, the two of them laughed heartily at the same time. In the city where the war drums were like thunder, the laughter of the two heavily injured Emperor Realm experts was incomparably weak. It was completely drowned out by the noise. Chapter 1577. On the battleship, Qin Hao observed the battle with high concentration. He saw all the confrontations at all levels, and his consciousness covered the entire battlefield. Naturally, he saw Duanmu Qinghui falling into the city with injuries after fighting two opponents alone. Qing Lao's aura has become very weak, but most of the nomological spear momentum was shared by Stone Emperor Yuan, so he should be fine. Duanmu Qinghui cultivated alchemy and knew how to quickly deal with his injuries. Qin Hao wasn't worried about this. On the other hand, Emperor Yuan, who was good at petrifying nomological laws, seemed to have held back many times during the confrontation. Otherwise, it would be difficult for Duanmu Qinghui to refine the other party's nomological laws so quickly. Stone Emperor didn't use too much strength. Qin Hao smiled. After all, he wasn't a member of the Xianyuan family. Stone Emperor's approach was very smart. He not only protected himself, but also didn't destroy the advantage that the Zheng dynasty had obtained. Moreover, Xianyuan Gaoyan couldn't find fault with him. How could he be blamed for being injured in the confrontation and being unable to fight again? Now that three emperors had left the battle, Nin Ao no longer had the advantage of numbers. Of course, in terms of combat power, the emperors of the Zheng clan and Night Net Palace were weaker. In particular, the four elders of Night Net Palace were forcibly promoted by Senior Sister. They were even weaker than the normal Emperor Yuan. They were completely at a disadvantage in the battle. But this disadvantage was only temporary. Qin Hao still had three other emperors who hadn't shown up yet. They were his trump cards. The purpose was to prevent Xianyuan Gaoyan's backup plan. The Xianyuan family had a strong foundation and had operated Nan Ao for thousands of years. Who knew if the emperors that appeared on the surface weren't all of them? Qin Hao had to be on guard. At this moment, although Emperor Yuan of the Zheng clan was at a disadvantage, they could still hold on and wouldn't be defeated by the other party for a while. As long as they firmly delayed the other party, the Zheng clan would definitely win this battle. Qin Hao glanced at the Venerate battlefield. Just as he had expected, Su Jin was leading the Yaoguang Peak disciples to execute the Sky Sound Resonance. Even though the Zheng clan only had two Yuan Venerate teams, these two teams had the support of the half-step Yuan Emperor's sound technique. Basically, no opponent could match up to them. No matter how many Yuan Venerate battle formations the Xianyuan family had, it would be futile and useless. Once the Yuan Venerate battle formation stepped forward to stop them, it would only add to the pile of corpses. Emperor Yuan was obstructed, the Yuan Venerate battle formations were suppressed, and the Saint army was caught in a fierce battle. The situation in the imperial city was getting worse and worse. Trash. Xianyuan Gaoyan's gaze was cold as he watched the Stone Emperor fall from the sky. Sure, Gondan had been in the Monarch realm for many years. His petrification Dao had reached the point of perfection. However, he was careless and was trapped by Duanmu Qinghui's rules. He was truly incompetent. Spear the Arch was even more foolish. He did not even know that someone had refined the laws into his body. Had his brain been eaten by a pig? However, Even without the two of them, the Xinyuan clan still had the upper hand in the battle of great emperors. However, such an outcome was far from satisfying Xinyuan Gaoyan. He did not want to gain the upper hand, but to crush them. He wanted to kill the Zheng clan's emperor and the madam's wife of the Night Net Palace to turn the tide of the battle. Now, even though he had the upper hand, he couldn't break through the other party's blockade and help the city. Xinyuan Gaoyan's face turned paler and paler. The situation had deviated from his expectations. "I'll go." A burly figure stepped out. His square face was filled with domineering might. Xinyuan Wuba, who had inherited Xinyuan Gaoyan's bravery, volunteered to fight. "Ba-er, don't be careless. Remember, you are the crown prince, the next emperor Xinyuan," Xinyuan Gaoyan instructed. Xinyuan Gaoyan could only let Xinyuan Wuba fight now. Moreover, he was very confident in Xinyuan Wuba's cultivation. "Okay." Xinyuan Wuba nodded and raised his thick eyebrows. Dazzling Emperor's light surged around his body as he swooped down like a domineering dragon king. Then, he threw a heavy punch that contained vigorous rules of order at a Zheng clan elder. That Zheng clan elder was a second-tier monarch and was not a match for the Xinyuan clan elder. At this moment, he was forced to retreat. Suddenly, he heard a rumbling sound above his head. He looked up, and his expression changed drastically. Xinyuan Wuba, the crown prince of the proud south, the successor of Emperor Xinyuan. A fierce fist smashed down. The fist aura pierced through the void. The great Tao of gravity bombarded, shattering countless space. The sky seemed to be crushed by the fist aura. It was not something that this Zheng clan elder could contend against. Sixth-tier Monarch Yuan, my life is over. The Zheng clan elder said sadly. The opponent in front of him was a fourth-tier Monarch Yuan. If they continued fighting, he wouldn't be able to hold on for long. Suddenly, Xinyuan Wuba, a battle maniac, appeared. How could he survive in this situation? This battle was dangerous. Before they set off, everyone knew that someone might die. But they didn't expect that the first person to die would be him. Boom! An ear-shattering sound of a huge wave exploded above their heads. Its power was extremely terrifying. The aftermath of the platinum wave swept down, sending the Zheng clan's elder and Emperor Yuan of the Xinyuan family flying more than 1,000 feet away. A huge soul ship shuttled through the void. At the front of the soul ship stood a white-bearded old man in battle armor. This old man was the old patriarch of the Zheng clan, Zheng Qingqi's grandfather. Xinyuan Wuba made a move. He naturally couldn't watch his family's Emperor Yuan get slaughtered. He urged the soul ship to enter the array and blocked the attack. However, when the soul ship came into contact with the fist aura, a mouthful of old blood spurted out. Old ancestor Zheng somersaulted dozens of times in the air before he could barely stabilize his body. His body was in turmoil. "Big brother." The Zheng clan elder who escaped the calamity shouted. "Focus on the battle. Xinyuan Wuba's opponent is me." Old ancestor Zheng stepped in the air. A mass of platinum light condensed into a soul ship and gathered at the bottom of his feet again. Endless light flowed, enveloping him and the soul ship together. His aura was greatly boosted. "Are you worthy?" Xinyuan Wuba looked down on old ancestor Zheng condescendingly. Third-order Emperor Yuan, 3 levels lower than him. Looking for death? Again, old ancestor Zheng was old but strong. He urged the soul ship under his feet and rushed up to the sky. A Jiuquan royal saber was drawn from his waist and slashed 3 huge saber lights at Xinyuan Wuba's face. The saber lights flew fiercely and turned into a 3-headed warship midway. Using the void as a sea, it rode the wind and broke the waves. When it was wrapped in the might of the great Tao that conquered the 4 seas, it majestically blasted towards Xinyuan Wuba. "Let's see how many punches you can take," Xinyuan Wuba shouted as he pointed his 5 fingers downwards. The universe changed color, and endless airflow surged, twisting the space. A vortex that covered the sky was formed, swallowing the 3-headed soul ship. The vortex flickered with terrifying gravity rules. Bang! Boom! Boom! The vortex strangled and sucked in the soul ship. It was directly crushed by the gravity laws. Then it covered old ancestor Zhang's head and swallowed him together. Cough, cough, Brother Qin. I'm afraid my grandfather won't be able to hold on for long. Zhang Qinshi looked at the battle and said, Old Master Zheng has my second senior brother's Emperor Rui Rainbow Silk. Are you still afraid? Qin Hao looked at Zhang Qinshi calmly and smiled. He also learned from senior sister Miori that the Emperor Red Silk wrapped around Zhang Yu's body was originally called the Rui Rainbow Silk. It was a mid-grade Emperor-level 9th Forge ritual implement produced by Xintian Peak. It was extremely powerful. Originally, the Emperor Red Silk wrapped around Zhang Yu's waist was an inconspicuous gray hemp rope. However, this item had a spirit and could change according to its owner's will. When it fell into the hands of different people, it would become a different weapon. If it recognized Shou Wuk as its master, it could become a sword. After the Divine Palace was destroyed, although Zhang Yu and Eastern Sky died, only a trace of obsession was left. However, the Emperor weapon that they had when they were alive really existed. Later, when she heard the tone of senior sister Miori's explanation, even she was a little envious of Qin Hao. This Emperor Red Silk was something that Zhang Yu had obtained by luck. The previous generation's 12 chief disciples were similar to how Qin Hao and the others chose their Emperor weapons at Xintian Peak. The Emperor weapons were stored in different boxes. Because everyone's cultivation was high enough, they easily subdued the weapon spirits. Chang Yu, on the other hand, had chosen the most powerful one among them. Second senior brother. At the mention of this name, Qin Hao couldn't help but secretly clench his fists. A heavy weight weighed down on his heart. That's right. Old Master can't use the Emperor Red Silk, but with it wrapped around his body, it won't be that easy to break through. Zhang Qinshi saw the change in Qin Hao's expression and said no more. Was he worried? Of course he was. Although the Emperor Red Silk was powerful, it recognized Qin Hao as its master. The Patriarch couldn't use its power. At present, he could only hope that the battle would progress quickly. Once Xinyuan Gaoyan was forced to use his hidden trump card, he would be able to do whatever he wanted without holding back. Boom! A muffled sound came from the sky. Everyone looked up and saw that the huge vortex shrouding the sky had shrunk into a ball, producing a strong explosion. Endless gravity loss swept out, causing the sky to tremble. Everyone was worried for Patriarch Zheng. However, after the high air waves disappeared, the old figure in armor was still standing majestically. Another mouthful of blood spurted out. Looking at the remaining half of the Emperor's sword in his hand and the intact Emperor Red Silk wrapped around his body, Patriarch Zheng thought to himself that there was no comparison. After withstanding Xinyuan Wuba's attack, the Emperor's sword that had accompanied him for many years was broken. However, there wasn't even a trace of the Emperor Red Silk left behind. It was really a good treasure. However, although the Emperor Red Silk offset the gravity law, the impact of the explosion still blasted on his body. Patriarch Zheng didn't feel good at all. You're fine. Xinyuan Wuba was slightly shocked. The attack just now used 80% of his strength, and it contained the purest power of the Xinyuan royal family's bloodline. Even a 5th-stage Emperor Yuan wouldn't just spit out a mouthful of blood. There must be a powerful protective treasure hidden on the old man's body. Xinyuan Wuba quickly thought of this. Again, Patriarch Zheng raised his head and puffed out his chest. The Earth's soul ship under his feet flickered with light as he rushed toward Xinyuan Wuba again. Although it was a little painful, it wouldn't kill him anyway. You old bastard, Xinyuan Wuba roared. The raging golden-white Emperor light seemed to have crushed the Tao around him. He punched out with both fists and smashed toward Patriarch Zheng's head. Damn it! Xinyuan Gaoyan clenched his teeth slightly. He was obviously a little anxious. He didn't expect Xinyuan Wuba to be unable to break through the defense of the Zheng clan's Emperor stage. However, the casualties in the city were getting more and more serious. The lethality of the beast tide was great. Half of the city fell into the hands of the Zheng clan soldiers. Currently, The Xianyuan royal family was about to retreat to the floating palace. If they couldn't get help soon, once the Zheng clan soldiers invaded the imperial harem, the direct family members would be completely exposed to the enemy's blade. Looking at the jade buildings and palaces collapsing one after another, the majestic imperial city was filled with smoke. This city had been run by the family for thousands of years. It symbolized the supreme dignity of the Xianyuan royal family. It was intolerable. It was simply unbearable. Xianyuan Gaoyan hated the people of the Spirit Beast sect to death. He shouted, "Renwang battle formation!" This shout shook the 9 heavens and came from the sky. It was as if a divine might had descended, and everyone's eardrums were about to be torn apart. Finally, you can't help but show yourself? Qin Hao looked at the other side of the void. At the front of the countless Ren Huangs stood one person. It was Xianyuan Wuying. Chapter 1578. The most obvious difference between a first-rate sect and an overlord force was Emperor Yuan. The Emperor realm was a great threat to a first-rate sect, but the number of people was limited, and they were easily restrained by forces of the same level. As for the martial artists below the Venerable realm, although there were many of them, they couldn't change the overall situation. The one who really affected the situation was still the primitive emperor. If Xianyuan Gaoyan wanted to reverse the situation in the city, he had to mobilize the Ren Huangs. There was no other way at the moment. Kill. Brilliance flowed around Xianyuan Wuying's body and gathered into a set of armor. This second prince of Southern Pride was the commander of the Ren Huang army, commanding all the Ren Huang powerhouses. At this moment, above the void, there were a total of 5 Ren Huang armies in Southern Pride. 2 of the Xianyuan royal family's battle formations were formed by the direct descendants of the Xianyuan royal family, and the other 3 teams were formed by the powerhouses of the various sects within the territory. Each team had more than 400 people, and a total of more than 2,000 Ren Huang powerhouses were thrown into the battlefield. The scale was vast. Layer after layer of Ren Huang light shrouded the sky, filling the world. Suddenly, it pressed down from the sky, and the aura made the martial artists in the city tremble like ants, not daring to move. Sure enough, there is no emperor. Qin Hao finally relaxed a little and transmitted a message behind him. Everyone, gather. Everyone was waiting for this moment. They walked out of the divine palace, and this was their first battle. On the surface, it was to help Qin Hao, but wasn't it also a test for themselves? To see how well they had honed their martial arts in the past 3 years? Of course, after this battle, everyone would part ways and return to their respective clans. Screech! A peacock god's cry resounded through the sky. Qin Hao took the lead, stepping on a rainbow cloud sparrow, and rushed towards the 5 Ren Huang battle formations of Southern Pride. At this moment, the Ren Huang light flowed around his body, and his aura was extremely strong, making him look like a celestial sage. Behind Qin Hao, the disciples of the 7 peaks followed closely. After a short rest, the disciples of the Tai Wei peak recovered some soul power and also participated in the battle. The silhouettes of Ren Huangs streaked across the sky and gathered closely together. At this moment, Mizang Peak's Lei Jiao, Hai Sha, and the others had the most ferocious offensive power and were at the front of the battle formation. Daozong Peak's Yishu Han, Chun Wanqin, and the others surrounded the 2 sides of the formation. The disciples of Tai Wei Peak and Uni Peak were in the middle, providing the source of the formation's power. Xiaogua, Gu Kuei, and the other Xintian Peak disciples were at the back. Everyone in this Ren Huang battle matrix had an extraordinary temperament, and their talents were close to demonic. When they were combined, there was almost no weakness to be found. Amongst the numerous peerlessly graceful figures, the most striking was naturally Qin Hao, and he was like a peacock emperor that flew through the sky with a majestic aura. His vast spiritual power permeated and resonated with the battle matrix, connecting every disciple of the divine palace. Everyone's minds merged, and a layer of divine light covered everyone, swallowing them all up. The whole body turned into a peacock divine bird, with colorful light lingering around its huge body, all the way to Xin Yuan Wuying's battle matrix. Behind the peacock divine bird, there was another battle matrix of Ren Huang following. It was made up of the Zheng tribe and the Night Luo Palace. They transformed into the black tortoise divine turtle battle matrix and climbed up. On the wide tortoise shell, coiled vipers opened their huge mouths and flicked their tongues, constantly making loud noises. The two battle matrices were full of momentum. Go and join up with Brother Qin and the others. I can handle it here. Su Jin looked up. The members of the Divine Palace had taken action, and the Yaoguang peak naturally had to return. Su Jin, be careful, a disciple of the Yaoguang peak said. A disciple from the Alchemy peak said. Immediately after, the crowd dispersed the resonance of the heavenly notes and turned into streams of light, flying towards the divine peacock in the void. Their speed was extremely fast, like tiny halos, constantly merging into the divine peacock's body. Suddenly, the pressure released by the huge peacock divine bird became even stronger, and the cry it made was like a real ancient divine bird. Xin Yuan Wuying. Qin Hao's roar came out from the mouth of the peacock divine bird. The sound waves moved forward like a raging hurricane that shook the void and blasted toward the Ren Huang battle matrix of the Southern Ao sect. The three battle matrices of the Southern Ao sect at the front were impacted by the sound waves, and the rhythm seemed to be sucked into the matrix to destroy them. They couldn't help but release the light of the matrix at the same time, which stabilized the matrix. Even so, they were shaken back hundreds of meters by this roar. It was the same battle matrix of Ren Huang, but the disciples of the Divine Palace were united as a whole. With a roar, they had shaken back three opponents, which was enough to show how powerful their cultivation was. You're ruining my business. You're courting death. Xin Yuan Wuying recognized the owner of the voice. He would recognize the murderer of his son, even if he turned into a ghost. Whoosh! The dazzling light of the matrix was released, and the army of Ren Huang, led by Xin Yuan Wuying, instantly turned into a golden dragon. The dragon's body was hundreds of meters long, and it roared into the sky like a divine dragon that had suppressed the ages. It ordered the battle matrix of the Ren Huang of the Southern Ao sect. Kill him. As the voice fell, the golden dragon moved at the same time. The dragon's body wriggled and twisted, and the heavens were shaking. The sharp dragon claws stepped down and clasped the head of the peacock divine bird. At the same time, two of the battle matrices formed by the Ren Huang of the Southern Ao sect attacked together. The light of the sword soared into the sky, and a divine sword was full of the sword might of the great path. The cold light pierced the void and spewed out hundreds of meters, stabbing toward the abdomen of the divine bird. Roar! The roar of a tiger spread, and the other battle matrix was a flaming tiger with wings on its back. It was surrounded by flames, and its giant paws slapped down at the same time. Since they were enemies, there was no need to talk about fairness with the Zheng clan. Xin Yuan Wuying wanted to destroy the divine bird, and the Ren Huang of the Southern Ao sect would cooperate fully. The three battle matrices charged in a triangular formation. The sword and the tiger were in front, and the dragon was behind. The aura that converged was extremely terrifying. It was as if they had condensed into a new whole, forming a battle matrix outside the battle matrix. At this moment, even an upper-level Yuan emperor would have to hide in the face of such a battle. However, Qin Hao didn't need to hide. He urged the peacock matrix to go against the flow. Its huge wings spread out, setting off a violent airflow that cut through the space and swept toward the flaming tiger. At this moment, in the sky above Xinyuan Imperial City, Qin Hao's voice sounded, "Kill." Chapter 1579. Qin Hao controlled the Matrix, and the soul power of all the disciples of the Divine Palace gathered toward Chen Wanqin. Chen Wanqin released the ice will and covered the peacock's wings. The wings completely turned into ice wings. As soon as the word slash fell, the wings swept forward with terrifying sharpness. The endless space was swept away and frozen as they slashed straight at the huge body of the flaming tiger. The Peak Renwang, leading the flaming tiger, was shocked. The void was frozen, and this ice was unprecedentedly strong. Even though they formed a matrix and had the matrix power to resist, they still felt that their spiritual souls were about to be frozen. The tiger roared in the sky, and the power of the flame of the great path burned wildly. The tiger's paw, wrapped in flames, slapped down and collided with the peacock's wings. At this moment, the tiger's paw was cut open, and the peacock's wings continued to slash forward, spreading across the huge tiger's body. The flames on the tiger's body were frozen. Puff! A light cut through the void. Countless spectators saw that the flaming tiger turned into a huge ice sculpture, motionless in the void as if it was dead. Immediately afterward, cracks spread across the tiger's body and began to crack inch by inch. With a crash, it collapsed into countless ice cubes. The battle matrix disintegrated on the spot, and all the Rinhuangs in the matrix were covered in ice. Lifeless corpses fell into the city. So strong, it can't even withstand a single blow. Shocking. Too shocking. The warriors of the southern region, who were watching the battle from afar, trembled. They were all in a battle matrix composed of Rinhuangs, but the people of Southern Pride were killed with a single blow. If they hadn't seen it with their own eyes, no one would have believed it. The disparity in strength was too great. This blow not only destroyed the power of the battle matrix, but also completely annihilated all the Rinhuangs. With a group of monsters that formed the Peacock Divine Bird Rinhuangs, or a group of Emperors Yuan. This scene brought extreme shock to the onlookers. However, at the same time, the Southern Pride Sword Matrix also arrived. The 100-foot-long sword aura spurted forward and pierced the peacock's abdomen with the power to penetrate it. But this sword didn't produce the scene that everyone imagined. When the sword aura pierced the peacock's body, it pushed the divine bird all the way forward. Even though the void was raging with the terrifying sword aura, it still couldn't tear the peacock apart. It hurts. Within the array, Siowa let out a painful groan. He activated the demon ox body and pushed his powerful palms forward. The skin on his arms burst open and blood flowed out continuously. Beside him, Gucci had transformed into an iron rhinoceros. His body was also covered in sword scars. All the Xiantian Peak disciples had been killed by the sword chi and suffered different injuries. However, the power of this sword was firmly blocked by the people of Xiantian Peak. They were like layers of steel plates that could not be pierced. 400 high-level Rinhuangs formed a sword formation. How can its power be weak? However, this is the extent of the primitive emperors in the outside world. Destroy the sword formation. Qin Hao shouted, "Let me do it." Lei Jiao suddenly clenched his fists. His burly body surged with a terrifying thunder Dao might. All right. With Qin Hao's thoughts, the soul power of the Divine Palace disciples in the array frantically poured into the Thunder Jiao's body. The Thunder Flood Dragon's eyes widened. He felt that Yi Futian's power was boundless. The might of the Way of Thunder in his body burst out at an unimaginable level. It was as if he had become the soul of the peacock divine bird. Ka-cha-cha. Endless thunderbolts wrapped around the peacock divine bird. The lightning was extremely dazzling. It had completely turned into a thunderbird. It was as if the great path had condensed into thunder. The void within a radius of 100 feet was turned into a sea of lightning intertwined with lightning. Go to hell. The thunder flood dragon roared. The peacock's sharp claws stretched out and grabbed the sword light in his abdomen. The sharp claws sank in little by little. The terrible power of thunder poured into the sword light. As for the people in the Southern Arrogant Sword Matrix, their expressions changed drastically. They saw terrible thunderbolts invading their heads. Bolts of heavenly thunder struck down, falling on everyone's body and striking their spiritual souls. At this moment, it was as if doomsday had arrived in the Sword Matrix. Boom! Bang! There was a spectacular explosion. The sword light that flew across the void collapsed under the peacock's claws. Thunder and lightning filled the sky. Countless bodies spat out blood in the sea of thunder. It was as if they were about to spit out their internal organs. They kept falling from the sky. Many Rinhuangs had died before they landed. Their spiritual souls were buried in the thunder. Another blow. Everyone was shocked. Divine thunder of the heavens. What kind of damage was that? The two southern arrogant Runhuang battle matrices did not survive a single blow from the peacock. The peacock divine bird was like a god, king, dominating the sky. It was extremely powerful and invincible. Die! The dragon king of Jiuqian swooped down. Xian Yuan Wuying's angry roar sounded in the sky. The two southern arrogant Renhuang battle matrices were destroyed. Although the impact on him was equally strong, this was a battlefield. No matter what happened, killing the enemy was the only goal. Moreover, the enemy who killed his son was in the peacock battle matrix. The sharp dragon claws clasped the peacock's neck and penetrated it bit by bit. The dragon's body pressed down on the peacock's head, crushing it all the way down. The battle matrix formed by the direct descendants of the Xianyuan royal family was far more powerful than the Renhuangs from other sects. After all, the warriors in the matrix were of the same bloodline as Xianyuan Wuying. They had the same kind of blood flowing in their veins. The infinite gravity of the Great Path pierced into the peacock battle matrix. The suppressive force was very strong. With just one blow, all the disciples of the Divine Palace in the Matrix had blood gushing out of their mouths. They felt as if their bodies were carrying a heavy mountain. They could not support it and were forced down. Guard your spiritual soul. Just pour out your soul power. Northgate Xuanda, Tengong, heal everyone. Qin Hao raised his palms high. It was as if a mountain was pressing down on his head. His arms trembled violently. Dense dragon scales grew, but in the next second, they exploded and shattered. In a battle matrix, no one could change the overall situation. Even though Qin Hao's art of endless samsara could restrain the gravity of the Xianyuan family to a certain extent, the force above his head was far beyond what he could bear. He could not resist it. Beams of medicine souls flashed and shuttled through the matrix. They lingered on every disciple of the Divine Palace. The internal injuries suffered by everyone were temporarily alleviated. Fortunately, Senior Brother let us get in touch with the people of the Xianyuan family in advance. We learned about their gravity attacks and gradually adapted to it. Otherwise, we might not have been able to bear it, a disciple of the Divine Palace said. Even though they had been mentally prepared, when Xianyuan Wuying activated the power of the Matrix, they were still injured. Fortunately, it was us. If it were other Renhuangs, they would have broken the Matrix even if they did not die. A voice sounded. Everyone nodded. They did not doubt it. If the Zheng clan's Xuanwu Black Turtle had taken it, the battle Matrix would have been broken. After all, the Xianyuan family was an imperial family. The power of their bloodline was tyrannical. In fact, many of their talents were not much weaker than the disciples of the Divine Palace. For example, Xianyuan Jia, Xianyuan Feng, Xianyuan Di, and the other rising stars. However, the most talented descendants of the Xianyuan family were all killed by Qin Hao. What's more, they were from the same family. The power of the battle matrix was extremely pure. They were not like them. They came from all over the continent and were pieced together by the disciples of various families. Even though everyone's talent was extraordinary, the degree of soul power fusion was not as perfect as the Xianyuan family. Qin Hao, if we don't fight back, the Matrix will be dispelled sooner or later. Fairy Qianning's hair was a little messy, and her heart was beating faster and faster. The feeling of a heavy mountain pressing down on her head and her body falling rapidly was very uncomfortable. She saw that the Peacock Matrix light had been torn apart, and the rules invading the Matrix were getting stronger and stronger. If they did not make an effective counterattack, they would really be crushed by the gravity of the Xianyuan family. If they lost the first battle, they could not afford to lose the face of the Divine Palace. Alchemy sound technique, spiritual attack. Qin Hao ordered. Their soul power was chaotic and not as pure as the Xianyuan family. However, chaos had its advantages. At least they would gain more than the other party. The Xianyuan family only knew a single gravity attack. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Beams of light flashed in the matrix. The disciples of the Alcade Peak looked at each other and nodded in tacit understanding. One of them stretched out his hand and pressed it on the strings of the guqin. Heavenly sound resonance. Clang. 10 fingers plucked, and the rest of the instruments played at the same time. All the sounds were wrapped around the body of K, under Qin Hao's feet. Screech. The rainbow skylark let out a sonorous cry, and the peacock divine bird formed by the matrix resonated at the same time. After all, this battle matrix was based on K-Er, and the cry of the skylark was more lethal. The cries of the K-Er resounded, extremely loud and clear. It was as if the real divine peacock king had exploded with anger. The turbulent sound waves shook the void, and layers of sound waves continued to blast into the golden divine dragon matrix. Suddenly, Xin Yuan Wuing and the others' eyes widened and became bloodshot. They only felt that the cries of the K-Er outside the matrix were directly affecting their minds, trying to destroy their souls. Chapter 1580. The peacock's cry invaded their minds, and a 7-color divine bird appeared in the minds of countless people in the matrix, pecking at their souls. Many people's faces turned pale, and blood flowed from the corners of their mouths. Their will was weakened. Faintly, the golden dragon battle matrix showed signs of instability. Rules and will suppression. Xin Yuan Wuing controlled the battle matrix, and the golden dragon's claws released the peacock. It rose into the air and turned its head to let out a dragon's roar. The dragon's roar shook the heavens and earth, forming a storm of the great path that covered the peacock's body, completely swallowing the cry. At this time, there were no more cries of the peacock, only the fierce roar of the dragon remained. Infinite power of rules gathered in the storm, crushing the peacock's body and continuing to bombard it. Change the matrix. 40 to 50 Yawang Peak disciples were obviously no match for hundreds of Renwang. The direct descendants of the Xianyuan family gathered together to perform the rules of gravity, and it was indeed no small matter. Qin Hao made a prompt decision to change the matrix. Buzz. Infinite light erupted from the peacock's body, and the huge divine bird's phantom shrank until it gradually condensed into an arrow. The arrow was wrapped in blood-red, demonic flames, and it was extremely fierce. At this time, Qin Hao took out the Great Void divine sword and held it above his head with both hands. Using his body like a bow, the sunset heart technique in his body surged, and the soul power of all the disciples of the divine palace rushed towards him. For a time, the arrow outside burst with an extremely shocking light, as if it could shoot down the sun and moon. A blood-red light pierced out, and no matter how strong the storm was, the arrow aimed at a point and rushed forward with all its might. It flew out of the center of the storm and stopped in the void. The light of the arrow dispersed, and the phantom of the peacock, divine, king, appeared again. Boss, Sister Wanxin, and I can perform rule fusion techniques. Yi Shuihan said. Ice and water complemented each other, and they had tried it at Daozong Peak. Okay. Qin Hao had absolute confidence in the two. One was the sacred ice spirit body, and the other was the water god body. They had both comprehended the rudiments of rules, and when their soul power merged, the power could be imagined. Looking at the disciples of Daozong Peak, Qin Hao asked loudly, Daozong Imperial Method, Empress Hua Holy Spirit Method, how many of you have cultivated it? This. Many disciples lowered their heads. Empress Hua Holy Spirit Method was the imperial method of Daozong Peak, and non-direct disciples were not qualified to cultivate it. Me. Zheng Qingxi and Fairy Qianning were both direct disciples of Daozong Peak. Naturally, they were qualified to learn the supreme imperial techniques of Daozong Peak. The Empress Hua Holy Spirit art was extremely powerful. It could increase a martial artist's vital qi and increase the destructive power of their spells. However, it was also very difficult to cultivate. Even though he had yet to grasp the essence of the technique, he was still able to use it. Thunder Flood Dragon, Sea Sand, activate the 9 Palaces battle with me. Dilly, fellow junior brothers and sisters, channel your soul power to the 5 of us. Qin Hao clenched his fists, and a beam of dazzling golden light shot out from his palms. His feet, knees, back, and heart were all pierced by golden beams of light. Monstrous battle intent permeated the formation, as if he had transformed into the body of a war god. Yagong, you monster! Thunder Flood Dragon's heart trembled. In the 9 Palaces battle with Dili, Qin Hao had opened 8 palaces. He only needed to open one more Tianling point to complete the 9 palaces. He must have asked the Mizar Peak Venerable to give him special treatment in private. Sea Sand and Thunder Flood Dragon looked at each other, and beams of dazzling golden light burst out from their bodies. They had opened 7 palaces at the same time, one less than Qin Hao. However, the battle intent was fierce and ferocious. Sister Wanqin, Yi Shuihan shouted. Chen Wanqi nodded. Endless will of the great path of ice swept out. Her body shone with crystal light, and she looked like a transparent ice sculpture. She gave off a holy feeling of the Ice Empress. Yi Shuihan's soul power surged, and his body was covered by a silver water armor. Under the water armor, his figure became slender and well-proportioned. His body exuded a faint divine aura, as if a water god had descended to the world. Yi Shuihan stared at the golden dragon battle formation and shouted, "Ice and water flow together. Why do you have such a strange name?" Qin Hao was a little speechless. He should have been more domineering so that others would think he was powerful. As the crown prince of Luo Shui, where was his education? How embarrassing. Buzz. Yi Shuihan waved the trident in his hand, and where the light of the trident passed, it formed an endless sea. The torrent was like a raging wave, swallowing up the heavens and the universe. Chen Wanqin closed her beautiful eyes, and she was like an ice goddess chanting quietly. She muttered something, and endless ice and snow spread out from her body, crazily covering the void. And in the outside world, the spectators were shocked to see that as soon as the divine peacock broke free from the storm, it flapped its wings at the same time. Its left wing slapped down, and a terrifying water flow blasted out like an ocean that wanted to swallow the sky. Below its right wing, ice and snow raged, forming a terrifying snowstorm. Ice and snow, 2 torrents of the great path, surged forward and merged midway, condensing into a terrifying ice pillar. At this moment, the endless space was filled with Tao of ice. The ice pillar extended all the way to the golden dragon battle formation. Everywhere it passed, the space was frozen. Wu Ying, don't resist it head-on. On the top of the sky, Xinyuan Gaoyan's face turned pale. Ice and water flowed together, and the 2 Tao of ice merged. It was a nomological fusion technique. Moreover, the power supporting this Tao of ice was very terrifying, almost exceeding the limit of Renwang. Whether it was vitality or battle will, it was impeccable. Not to mention Renwang, even the lower level of the arch would not be able to exert such extreme power. Anyone below the arch realm would be doomed. Roar! The golden dragon battle formation was naturally aware of the horror of this attack. Everyone in the formation, including Xinyuan Wuying, felt a strong sense of crisis. The dragon's body crazily wriggled, shuttling through the void, madly sprinting forward, trying to escape the domain covered by the Tao of Ice. However, no matter how fast the golden dragon battle formation was, how could it be faster than the power of the Great Path? The disciples of the Divine Palace condensed into a whole with the help of the formation. Wherever their minds were, the infinite space was frozen. Kacha! The heavens seemed to be still, and the entire sky above the imperial city turned into a world of ice crystals. It was glittering and extremely spectacular. It could be said that a sacred scene had descended. However, the most eye-catching thing was the dragon in the sky. The originally dazzling golden dragon had completely fallen into the ice layer at this time. The golden scales all over its body had turned into ice crystals, and it had turned into a beautiful ice dragon. It was very dazzling. It was stuck in place motionlessly, maintaining its swimming posture. From its posture, it seemed to be desperately trying to escape. But in the end, it was swallowed up by the great path of ice. Chapter 1581. The great path of ice covered the sky, and the golden dragon was trapped inside. It was completely sealed, and there was no way to escape. Behind them, there was a loud rumbling sound, and an icicle shot through the air. A blizzard raged along the way, trying to destroy the golden dragon battle matrix. In the battle matrix, Xin Yuan Wuying and the others were suppressed by the will of the great path of ice. The power of ice permeated the battle matrix and enveloped everyone. Everyone's body became stiff, and their spiritual souls seemed to be frozen by the will. However, their consciousness was very clear. Seeing the icicle coming from behind, everyone frantically urged their soul power. The power of the bloodline of the Xianyuan royal family gathered together, forming a terrifying gravity of the great path. At this critical juncture of life and death, no one dared to hold back and gave it their all. Invisible shock waves spread out from the golden dragon's body, and the gravity of the great path swept out, gradually shattering the ice layer. In the sky above, the boundless space became distorted. The icicle shot forward, intertwining with the gravity of the great path. Countless ice crystals were destroyed by the rules and fell down. The front of the icicle was constantly breaking apart. However, Yi Shuhen's water spirit was restored, and ice continued to grow in the broken areas. He actually charged forward against the gravity of the great path. Finally, with a heavy bang, the icicle hit the dragon's body. Whoosh! The dense shattering sound rang through the space, as if a force had shattered a mirror, and the divine dragon in the mirror was shattered as well. At this moment, countless pieces of ice fell from the sky, and the golden dragon battle matrix disintegrated. The figures of Ren Huang spat out blood and fell madly into the city. Every body was covered in frost, as if they had just fallen out of an ice cellar. Even though the members who formed the golden dragon battle matrix were the direct descendants of a Xianyuan royal family, and they had the most orthodox gravity of the great path, they could not withstand the attack of the disciples of the divine palace. This attack destroyed the matrix. Moreover, all the members of the royal family suffered varying degrees of injuries, and a few of them died directly. Xin Yuan Wuying spat out vermilion blood, and his limbs were stiff. He could not move, and his body fell from the sky. He looked at the divine peacock, and through the brilliant matrix light, he seemed to be able to see Qin Hao inside. At this moment, his eyes were filled with endless hatred and murderous intent. Unfortunately, he was defeated. Back then, in Golden Light City, when Qin Hao faced him, he could only hide behind Duanmu Qingwei, and in the end, had to flee in a sorry state. But 3 years later, the person who killed his son had the strength to defeat him head-on. One could imagine how Xianyuan Wuying felt. If he could do it all over again, he would have risked everything to keep Qin Hao alive in Golden Light City. Then, he would not have been attacked at home today. Hate, endless hatred, powerless hatred. He hated Qin Hao and himself. Xianyuan Wuying. Qin Hao's roar resounded in the sky. His red lotus-fiery eyes flickered as he caught a glimpse of that aura in the midst of the chaos. Immediately, the peacock flapped its wings, and the battle matrix swooped down with its sharp claws. It could crush Xianyuan Wuying into minced meat with just a gentle clench. However, at this moment, there was a pressure coming from above. Then, a pitch-black divine rock let out a sharp cry and pressed down. Its equally sharp claws stepped on the peacock's wings. Its sharp claws were like hooks, crushing layer by layer, tearing the peacock into pieces like a madman. This divine rock battle matrix was also formed by the direct descendants of the Xianyuan royal family. Its attack power was extremely strong. Of course, compared to the golden dragon battle matrix led by Xianyuan Wuying, it was naturally weaker. Originally, the rock battle matrix and another battle matrix of the Southern AO were attacking the divine beast Xuanwu with all their might. But before the battle began, the Zheng clan might have foreseen that they were no match for it. So, the Xuanwu battle matrix only defended and did not attack. It firmly protected its weaknesses and only exposed its shell for the rock to ravage. Even so, With the other battle matrix of the southern AO joining forces to attack, the Xuanwu suddenly clashed and fell into a dangerous situation. Countless Renhuang in the matrix were injured. If they were given a little more time, in less than 10 breaths, they could break through and slaughter everyone in the matrix in one fell swoop. However, Xin Yuan Wuing's 3 battle matrices were no match for the Peacock. The Divine Rock had to turn around to help. After all, Xin Yuan Wuing was the son of the Imperial Lord and Xin Yuan Wuba's brother. No matter what, they could not leave him alone. Buzz! The great path of gravity invaded the matrix. The disciples of the Divine Palace suddenly felt the pressure rise sharply, and there was the feeling of a heavy mountain pressing down on them. The blood in their bodies flowed uncontrollably. Many people were dizzy, and blood oozed from their ears and noses. Their consciousness seemed to be suppressed. Resonance of heavenly sound. The divine peacock continued to sing. The sharp cries turned into sound waves that enveloped the rock, rolling it into the intertwining rhythm. The sound technique interfered with the spiritual soul. In an instant, the matrix light that was maintaining the rock began to fluctuate, and the matrix power began to become unstable. But this rock was very stubborn. Obviously, it knew that once it let go of its claws, Xin Yuan Wuing would die without a doubt. It was still crazily tearing at the peacock's matrix light, and the matrix light was constantly torn to pieces by it. Let's use the ice and water flow together again. Qin Hao shouted. Yi Shuihan and Chun Wanqin's faces were slightly pale. They had consumed a lot of energy just now. It was not just them. After several bloody battles, they had destroyed 3 battle matrices formed by Run Huang of the same plane. Everyone here had consumed a lot of energy. Even so, they still obeyed Qin Hao's orders. They gritted their teeth and urged their soul power, instilling it into Lei Jiao, Hai Sha, Zheng Qingqi, and Goddess Qianning. Suddenly, the 2 great imperial methods of the Divine Palace appeared again, and all of them poured into the matrix power. The divine peacock burst into an extremely dazzling stream of colorful light. Ice and water raged and clung to the rock's body. Endless snowstorms raged in the void, and the 2 divine birds were swallowed up by this force. In the outside world, the spectators were shocked to see a huge snowstorm falling from the sky like a towering iceberg. When it fell halfway, it suddenly stopped. Immediately, the peacock's cry was loud and clear, and a huge, colorful matrix shadow soared out. The second the peacock flew away, the raging snowstorm in the sky disappeared, leaving only a crystal-clear black rock frozen in place. With a shattering sound, the rock cracked inch by inch and turned into shattered ice crystals, disappearing before everyone's eyes. Another blow. The warriors of the southern region were shocked beyond words. The peacock, the overlord of the sky, was really invincible. In this battle, there was almost no opponent. The people who formed the peacock battle matrix were all seniors from some sect. In the Zheng dynasty, there had never been such a peerless existence of Renhuang. Many people couldn't figure it out. Was there anyone more powerful than the Renhuang of the Nightnet Palace? At the top of the sky, many top leaders of the overlords looked down at the battle, and their hearts were not calm. At this moment, Li Yuan, the emperor of the proud north, looked at the peacock battle matrix with a pair of majestic eyes. He secretly transmitted his voice to Li Yaqi, the 7th prince. Do you all know them? He naturally knew the details of the Ren Huang in the peacock battle matrix. Each of them was talented and the most outstanding of the younger generation from all over the 4 regions of the continent. Each of them came from a famous sect, and many of them had the blood of imperial families. Moreover, they had been trained in martial arts by the Divine Palace. Today's battle had indeed opened Li Yuan's eyes, and he became more curious and yearning for the Divine Palace. This, Li Yaqi murmured, I know a few, but in fact, most of them are still unknown. He wasn't lying. The 7 peaks of the Divine Palace preached separately and didn't allow the disciples to communicate privately. If it weren't for the evil spirits, it would be difficult for them to have a chance to communicate in this lifetime. Then find time to get to know them all. Li Yuan laughed and scolded, and at the same time, he sighed in his heart. He was getting old. The future of the divine wilderness continent would be dominated by this peacock. Today, anyone in the peacock battle matrix would have the qualifications and ability to dominate a part of the world in the future. Li Yaqi didn't come from a good family and didn't have the support of his mother's family. So he needed to maintain a relationship with this group of people. I know, Li Yaqi's eyes were a little sore. After so many twists and turns, he once swore to kill Qin Hao, but the two of them had buried the hatchet. 3 years of cultivation in the Divine Palace had changed many of his views. The moment the 7 peak masters were refined by the evil spirits, he also knew that there was something more precious in the world than cultivation. In fact, his father had never ignored him or looked down on him. It was just that they used different methods to train him and his brothers. Second brother. The 4th Prince Li Yajin secretly used his arm to nudge the 2nd Prince Li Yaxu. The old man seemed to have whispered something to his 7th brother. He was most likely worried that they would suppress his 7th brother. Although his mother was born a servant, she was far less outstanding than our mother. But the blood in his body comes from the same source as ours, so keep it in check in the future. The 2nd Prince Li Yaxu could naturally guess what his father was thinking. Even if he didn't say it, he knew. But his father was worrying too much. He and Li Yajin had never thought of murdering his 7th brother. They hadn't before, and in the future, he didn't know. But now Li Yaxu only knew one thing. The Southern Pride's time had come, and the Northern Pride's time to unify the proud God Empire had come. Chapter 1582. Proud South and Proud North were originally one entity. A long time ago, the southern region was in turmoil. Warlords ruled over each other, and the flames of war were everywhere. The Ning clan came out of the forest and formed an alliance to build the Ning Wu Empire. Of course, there were also other heroes who came out of nowhere to suppress the chaos. The Li clan and the Xinyuan clan rose to prominence during that time. The ancestors of the Li clan and the Xinyuan clan were a pair of life and death friends. They swept through the chaos and built the Proud God Empire. At that time, the Proud God Empire was the true #1 empire in the southern region. Even Ning Wu paled in comparison. The ancestors of the two clans were very close. Later, it was decided that the Li clan would be the emperor of the Proud God Empire. The Xinyuan clan's ancestor was willing to assist his close friend. It was clear that the ancestors of the first generation of the Xinyuan clan were broad-minded. But good times didn't last long. After the ancestors of the two clans withered, the relationship between the two clans was no longer as good as before. The descendants of the Xinyuan clan had always been dissatisfied. The two ancestors had built the empire, so why should they respect the Li clan as emperor? As time passed, his dissatisfaction grew stronger and stronger. In the end, the relationship between the two clans broke down and a battle broke out. Although no one died in the battle, and it was only a dispute caused by the younger generation, it led to the collapse of the Proud God Empire. It was split into two, the Proud North and the Proud South. The Li clan's method was very generous. They cut off half of the empire and gave it to the Xinyuan clan, allowing them to establish themselves as emperors and rule over the endless territories. Although the Li clan's elders approved of the method, they were reluctant. They didn't want a war to break out because of the Xinyuan clan's strength. They didn't want a situation where both sides suffered and the Proud God Empire would fall from its pedestal. Therefore, they had to do this as an apology to the Xinyuan clan's ancestor. In their hearts, the Xinyuan clan's ancestor was a great hero. However, the descendants of the Xinyuan clan stirred up trouble and forced the Li clan to cut off half of their territory. Since then, the Proud South and the Proud North had formed the current situation. Although they didn't like each other, they always had the ambition to conquer each other, hoping to restore the glory of the Proud God Empire. At this time, the Li clan's clansmen saw the South's emperor army suffer heavy losses. In this battle, not only were many of the sect's rogue cultivators crushed, even the sect's direct descendants suffered a heavy blow. For the Xinyuan family, the collapse of the 4 battle formations had truly damaged their vitality. Without 1,000 years, Nan Ao would definitely not be able to recover. On the other hand, the Lee family's muscles and bones hadn't moved, their battle personnel orderly and in their peak condition. How could they not have any thoughts? Boom! The cultivators of the Blazing Sun Temple stepped into the void sky at the same time. They saw that the army of the southern Ao Renhuang was severely damaged, and the vitality of the Xianyuan clan was obviously damaged. Balls of holy fire began to burn fiercely, and the entire void sky was suppressed with a fighting will. Given the current situation, if he still did not make a move, the Xianyuan family would really be crushed by the Zheng family. It's better if you don't move. A voice as sharp as a sword rang out. Makamanji's long hair fluttered in the wind, and his eyes were fixed on the sun god. At that moment, the cultivators of the Sword Clan stepped forward at the same time. Waves of sword will raged, threatening the people from the Sage Hall. The sun god's face was calm, and there was only one expression on his face. Even though he knew that the Xianyuan family had suffered the most serious injury in history, and that their foundation had been damaged, his heart still did not waver. Only when he looked into Mu Yunzong's eyes did one see some emotional fluctuations in his golden eyes. Humph! Xianyuan Gaoyan snorted heavily, and his eyes moved to Makamanji. The Sword Clan's battle formation made it clear that they wanted to restrain the cultivators of the Sage Hall here and not give them a chance to intervene. Makamanji was a vicious schemer. At that moment, Xianyuan Gaoyan's aura was already hidden with murderous intent, but what worried him more was the situation in the city. Everyone could see that Nan Ao's vitality was damaged. As the emperor, he knew how bad the consequences would be when so many Ren Huang had fallen. But Xianyuan Gaoyan did not panic. He was very determined. He believed that even if the people of his family were defeated, the Zheng family would not be able to have the last laugh. The protective matrix of the clan? Makamanji glanced at Xianyuan Gaoyan. From his aura, he could feel the murderous intent emanating from him. The Sword Clan's actions today had crossed the bottom line of Emperor Xianyuan. However, the Muyun clan did not care. On the contrary, he was now a little worried. It was said that the protective matrix of a Xianyuan family was a combination of attack and defense. It had the power of an emperor. Could Qin Hao and the others really withstand it? Looking at the Zheng family's void warship, the Muyun clan shook his head secretly. What did he have to worry about? Buzz. In the sky, the Peacock battle matrix flew out of the blizzard, and the rock battle matrix behind it collapsed. However, the situation of Qin Hao and the others was not optimistic. The 300 disciples of the Divine Palace were all bleeding from the corners of their mouths. Their faces were pale, and their auras were unstable. As the seven-colored matrix light slowly dissipated, the huge peacock battle form suddenly disappeared, revealing the figures of everyone. We are unable to maintain the battle matrix. Be careful. Qin Hao reminded them. After killing the 4 Ren Huang battle matrices, his junior brothers had suffered heavy losses. But in any case, they had also disintegrated the Ren Huang forces of the Xianyuan family and dealt a heavy blow. As for the last battle matrix of the independent cultivators, it was restrained by the Ren Huang of the Night Net Palace and the Zheng family. It could not affect the overall situation at all. Senior brother, you must be careful, everyone replied. The battle matrix had been dispelled. Next, the 300 people would break up and enter the battle in the city to kill the enemy Ren Huang, who were severely injured. Although they were severely injured, the power of the Ren Huang was still terrifying. They could not give them a chance to turn the situation around and affect the low-level warriors in the battle. Okay, let's go. Qin Hao nodded. Stepping on the 7-colored demon sparrow, he swept down diagonally. Like a blood-red cloud of fire, he pressed into the city. Wherever he passed, no Ren Huang could stand in his way. Qin Hao chased after Xianyuan Wuying's aura at an unparalleled speed. Kill! Thunder Flood Dragon flashed around the great path. The figures of the disciples of the Divine Palace frequently entered the city from the sky. They either fought alone or in groups of 3 or 5. When they encountered the injured Ren Huang of the Xianyuan family, They killed them without mercy. Chapter 1583. Fierce battles could be seen everywhere in the vast and endless Imperial City. Although the Golden Dragon Battle Matrix and the Rock Battle Matrix were destroyed, most of the power of the Way was offset by the power of the Battle Matrix. A large number of Renhuangs were injured and fell into the city. At this moment, Renhuangs whose bodies were frozen continued to fall. High up in the sky, the disciples of the Divine Palace chased after them. Dense spells turned into layers of flowing light that fell from the sky. Countless Renhuangs of the southern Ao kingdom were hit and perished. Crackling lightning flashed. The Thunder Jiao was wrapped in the power of the great path of thunder. It took a step forward and traversed the space. Its fist blasted out forcefully. Endless power of thunder intertwined and spewed out, engulfing the three injured Renhuangs of Xianyuan in front of it. At this moment, the majestic thunder power wrapped around the bodies of the enemies and struck into their spiritual souls. They had no chance to resist. Thunder flashed, and they were directly struck into nothingness. Not far from the Thunder Flood Dragon, Sea Sand revealed his true form. He turned into a giant golden ape that was dozens of feet long. The ape's body was burly and majestic, full of great power. When he stepped into the city, countless palaces collapsed, and the earth shook. Roar! Sea Sand stretched out his palm. An endless spiritual chi of the great path gathered under his palm, condensing into a long staff. He swept out with the staff, and the sky was filled with staff shadows, covering an area of nearly 1,000 miles. When his long staff struck down, all the staff shadows in the sky struck at the same time. The power was like the end of the world, overbearing and boundless. At this moment, several Renhuangs of the direct line of Xianyuan stepped forward. Even though they were seriously injured and knew that they could not resist, they still attacked without fear. The light of Renhuang was released, and at the same time, a palm slammed into the air. Under the palm, the gravity rolled back into the sky. They wanted to hold up the world and not allow Su Haisha to desecrate the sacred city. However, the staff shadows all over the sky fell, and the light of gravity was extinguished. The staff shadows hit the heads of several people, and suddenly, the bodies of these Renhuangs who attacked were smashed into pieces. The attacks of the disciples of Mizang Palace were fierce. After being trained by the Divine Palace, Sea Sand's physical strength exceeded the limit of Renhuang in the outside world. Relying on the power of the Battle Matrix and the blood of the Xianyuan family, they formed a very strong force. But in a one-on-one fight, no one could stop the disciples of the Divine Palace, especially Sea Sand, who came from Mizar Palace and was the direct disciple of Mizar Peak. This strike not only killed a few Renhuangs with serious injuries, but it also turned the area within a radius of thousands of miles into a pitch-black pit. The earth veins were broken, and not a single blade of grass was left. Turning around, Sea Sand's huge ape body carried a long staff, stomping the ground and shaking the mountains, and rushed towards another battle group. Kill! In the Imperial City, the members of the Xianyuan clan were also in a frenzy. Among them, 2 cultivators at the pinnacle of the Renhuang Plain were luckier. They actually ran into the disciples of Taiwei Peak. Immediately, their soul power raged. The great path's gravity bound the space and crushed towards the disciples of Taiwei Peak who were exhausted. Rumble. The space trembled as if it was about to collapse. A terrifying gravitational light wave that could be seen with the naked eye instantly enveloped the disciples of the Supreme Way Peak. The gravitational force pressed heavily on their bodies. I told you to follow me closely, but you insisted on being stubborn. One of the disciples of Taiwei Peak roared angrily at the other. They were pharmacists, and they had not comprehended rules. They only relied on the medicinal properties of their primordial spirits. How could they compete with the Renhuangs of the Xianyuan clan who were good at attacking? Originally, they should have been with their fellow disciples from the other peaks. But now, they were separated from each other. The soul light around the other person flickered. The medicinal light wrapped around his body. He struggled to hold on, and cold sweat kept flowing from his forehead. It was too late to say anything now. Before the battle, Muri had warned them to be careful so as not to fail miserably. In the end, they failed miserably. They were simply unlucky. Creak. The great path's gravity pressed down, and layers of dim light continued to seep into the medicinal light. The two of them groaned and finally could not hold on any longer. It was as if they were crushed by a mountain, and they fell heavily to the ground. At this moment, their internal organs were almost crushed. Die! When the two Renhuangs who attacked saw this, their skinny palms pressed down at the same time, wanting to kill the two disciples of Tai Wei Peak on the spot. Whoosh! At this time, a sharp halberd light slashed down, cutting the gravity light wave and shattering it. The two old men were shocked. They looked up and saw a tall and handsome young man jump down like a god of war. The heavenly halberd in his hand shone with a dazzling light. He slashed out a terrifying half-moon light. With a poochie sound, the halberd slashed through the two old men's waists. What a ruthless young man! One of them spoke. Then they all fell to the ground dead. Mizar Palace's Qin Yun. Many thanks, Senior Brother Qin. The two Tai Wei Peak disciples who had narrowly escaped death crawled up with their faces covered in dust. They were simply grateful to the point of shedding tears. Qin Hao nodded as he swept his gaze across the battlefield. He was constantly searching for Qin Hao. The imperial city was huge and boundless. With K.'s fast speed, there was no way he could catch up to her. Follow me closely, Qin Yun said to the two disciples of Tai Wei Peak. Although he knew that Xianyuan Wuying was no match for Qin Hao, he still hoped that he could be safe. Fierce battles took place all over the city. Countless warriors lost their lives in every breath. Even Renhuang warriors were not spared. At this time, somewhere in the imperial city, a blood-red cloud of fire surrounded by demonic flames sped forward. Qin Hao stood on a skylark. With a great void sword in his hand, a Renhuang powerhouse would fall to the ground with a casual slash. He released his spiritual power and locked onto Xianyuan Wuying's aura. The two of them were getting closer and closer. Soon, 3,000 miles, 1,000 miles, 500 miles. When a familiar figure in damaged armor appeared in front of him, the cloud of fire instantly descended. Qin Hao roared. Xianyuan Wuying waved his sword like the sword-drawing technique. A startling sword aura condensed from the red lotus fire pierced through the space and stabbed directly in front of Xianyuan Wuying. Xianyuan Wuying's eyes narrowed to the size of a needle. As an ultimate Renhuang, he had now reached the level of the Music Palace's Grand Elder. He could summon the Imperial Tribulation at any time and form an Imperial body. Due to the power of the 36 calamities of the Great Path, he was not confident that he could successfully overcome them. So, he maintained the state of an ultimate Renhuang. At this level, he was infinitely close to the Imperial realm. His perception was very sharp. In fact, before Qin Hao shouted, he realized that danger was coming. In an instant, Xianyuan Wuying's body burst with a powerful light of gravity. A dark light screen appeared in front of him. On the light screen, the power of rules flowed, and the will of the Great Path was extremely thick. A blood-red sword light pierced through the air and penetrated the light screen. It ignored the Great Path of gravity of the Xianyuan family and severely injured Xianyuan Wuying. Crack! The light screen shattered, and a severed arm was thrown into the air. Xianyuan Wuying's body leaned back. His whole body seemed to be burned by flames. He could not help but let out a scream. Chapter 1584. The sword cut off his arm and narrowly avoided the gate of life. The sword chi contained the art of endless samsara that could tear apart the rules. Rules under the rules were ineffective. The sword pierced through the gravity defense directly. Xianyuan Wuying showed great pain. The wound on his broken arm flashed with the luster of the red lotus fire. His spiritual soul felt like it was piercing through. He looked at Qin Hao coming at him with the sword. Hatred rose in his heart. But at the same time, there was fear in his eyes. He did not expect Qin Hao to be so powerful. Even a peak Renhuang could not withstand his attack. He was not a great emperor, but his sword Qi was comparable to a sword emperor. What kind of lethality was that? Run! While they were hesitating, a middle-aged man descended from the sky and pressed his palm on Xianyuan Wuying's chest. He struck out with his palm, and the vigorous palm power sent Xianyuan Wuying flying into the distance. Then, the middle-aged man who suddenly appeared turned around and charged at Qin Hao. Dazzling golden flames surged around him. Mr. Jingxi, Xianyuan Wuying looked at his opponent and flew backward involuntarily. His body was wrapped in a stream of light as he escaped. Ji Jingxi was an extraordinary person from the southern region. They met by chance and became close friends. Ji Jingxi was also the master who trained Xianyuan Feng in martial arts. Seeing Xianyuan Wuying severely injured, he sacrificed himself to stop him. Infinite change of yin and yang. The middle-aged man formed a mudra with his hands. The brilliance of rules flowed around his body. A halo of the great path of yin and yang gathered above his head, absorbing the spiritual qi of heaven and earth. It grew bigger and bigger, as if there was a universe inside. He pointed forward. The light of yin and yang fell like the power of the heavens, trying to suppress Qin Hao. Those who stop me will die. Qin Hao was in a frenzy. The red lotus overbearing fire swam around the great void divine sword. He slashed out with the red lotus flaming blade. Boom! The several dozen meter-long flaming blade sliced through the air towards the yin-yang Dao light. For a moment, the sword Qi wreaked havoc, and sparks flew everywhere. The yin-yang Dao light burst forth with the power of the stars in the sky, as if it had transformed into a vast starry sky that covered the sky. Endless starlight fell madly, wanting to annihilate the burning heaven flame sea. However, the intensity of the fire was unparalleled. The more it burned, the more intense it became. The starlight was constantly being melted, and the fire continued to burn. The roar of a dragon's soul could be heard, and the roar shook the divine soul. Even though they were fighting from a distance, the middle-aged man's palms were ignited with 2 balls of blood-red devil flames. He felt as if there was a wild dragon churning inside his divine soul. Ah! A shriek was heard as the middle-aged man's body was instantly engulfed by the will of the fire of the red lotus. The yin-yang light of the way in the air was split apart by the flaming sword aura and was torn into countless shards of light. Mr. Jingxi. In the distance, Xianyuan Wuying saw the tragic scene and was filled with grief. No one can save you. A frenzied figure rushed out of the raging fire waves. Qin Hao's pair of blood-red eyes were particularly frightening. The skylark under his feet let out a high-pitched cry, and it chased after Xianyuan Wuying like an immortal bird. During this process, several Renhuangs of the Xianyuan family stepped forward to stop Qin Hao, but they couldn't stop him at all. When the flaming cloud flew all the way, those figures that rushed over were buried in the raging flames like moths. Boom! There was a tremor in the void, and the movement was extremely violent. The aura of Emperor Yuan disappeared in the sound. Qin Hao subconsciously raised his head, only to see an old man wearing the Xianyuan family's uniform rushing over. The emperor's light raged around him. From a distance, a huge palm print slammed down. This palm contained an extremely terrifying great path gravity. The sky seemed to be on the verge of collapsing. The vast might of the way was released, and countless cultivators in the city were intimidated by it. They were so frightened that they didn't dare to move. This palm was aimed directly at Qin Hao. The defense line of the Emperor Realm was broken. At the same time, the Emperor Realm Elder made his move. Behind him, the body of an Elder of the Night Luo Palace was shattered. His spiritual soul turned into a dim beam of light and escaped from the battle, flying toward the Zheng clan's flagship. The only thing he could do now was to escape back to Muri's side. He might still be able to protect his spiritual soul. This night, Luo Palace Elder tried his best. If it weren't for Qin Hao chasing Xin Yuan Wing too closely and diverting the attention of the Xin Yuan family elder, her spiritual soul might not have had the chance to escape. However, with this defeat, the old man pounced straight at Qin Hao. Be careful. Seeing this, great ancestor Zheng was shocked. Swoosh! At the same time, the Dihong silk wrapped around great ancestor Zheng's body flew down, like a swimming dragon passing through the void. Its speed was faster than the Xinyuan family elder, as if the Dihong silk had a soul. Qin hadn't know if it was an illusion, but the moment he looked up, he seemed to see Zhang Yu's figure. Whoosh! 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 The majestic emperor palm crushed the heavens. Before it, the Dihong silk wrapped around Qin Hao and Yun Kei's bodies. The emperor weapon flickered with light, and 3 layers of light wrapped tightly around them. It felt as if a pair of arms were protecting them. Boom! The heavy palm of the great path came crashing down like thunder. Boundless rules of gravity surged wildly, and Qin Hao and Kei felt as if their bones were about to shatter. Blood seeped out of their pores uncontrollably. Before the attack landed on their bodies, they were covered in blood by the squall that came crashing down. At this moment, the imperial rainbow sash also burst out with an extremely dazzling radiance. A layer of imperial light went against the momentum and clashed with the imperial palm. The 2 layers of terrifying Tao of rules turned into aftershocks that radiated outwards. Looking from the sky, the area hundreds of meters around Qin Hao had completely collapsed, turning into a sunken palm print. Poof! One hit. Qin Hao and Kei were knocked back from midair. This palm had forcefully cut off the path of pursuing Xinyuan Wuying. The fiery clouds were scattered, and 2 bodies tumbled out from the imperial robe sash. One fell into the distance, and the other crashed into a dilapidated palace. The palace, which was already dilapidated, was reduced to rubble in an instant. Although the Dihong silk had neutralized the old man's rule power, the shock waves that came from it still hit the 2 of them. Screech! Yun Kei fell to the ground, flapping her wings. She struggled for a long time, but could not get up. In the ruins of another palace, Qin Hao's body grew larger. His entire body was covered in broken dragon scales, and his body was covered in deep cuts. He shook his head with all his might several times, but he still could not wake up. His ears were ringing madly. Die! The old man from the Xinyuan family opened his eyes wide. He could still sense Qin Hao's aura. That palm strike didn't kill him. Then, the intense rule power gathered in the center of his palm again. He was about to unleash another palm. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. At this moment, 3 streams of light shot into the sky from outside the city. Each of them was surging with golden white emperor light. Their bodies were as fast as lightning, and their power was overwhelming. The fastest one was the sword Qi. To the left of the sword Qi was a ball of blood-red light. To the right was the figure of the great empress holding the jade water sword shadow. Chapter 1585. Showuk rose into the air. Emperor light wrapped around his body, and it was as if a beam of sword Qi had pierced through the void. It was extremely sharp. His right hand formed a sword finger, and he pointed it forward. Surging sword will bloomed from his body, turning into countless beams of sword Tao light. Endless rows of sword lights followed his body and flew forward. From afar, it looked like a huge sword peak was hanging upside down in the sky. It was vast and mighty. It was the 10,000 Sword Empyrean. That elder was a 5th-tier Monarch Yuan. He was the strongest elder in the Xinyuan family on the surface. His cultivation was extremely domineering. Showuk was a 1st-tier Monarch Yuan. He would naturally go all out in this battle. 10,000 swords flew together, and sword Tao rules flashed. The sword peak pierced upwards. Before the sword Qi arrived, the sword will already made the elder's expression change. At this moment, he felt a faint pain on his skin. It was as if the sword will had penetrated his monarch body. What a pure sword will! Even though they were enemies, the elder couldn't help but exclaim in his heart. After seeing Sho Wuck's face clearly, he naturally recognized him. He was from a sword sect, the nephew of the sword emperor Makamanji. However, since he had attacked him, he wouldn't hold back. The heavy palm of the great Dao that he had prepared to attack Qin Hao suddenly changed its direction and pressed down on Sho Wuck's head. The sword sect and the Zheng clan were the mortal enemies of the Xianyuan family. They should be killed. Boom! The heavy palm of the great Dao fell, and brilliant rules enveloped the entire space. The sky shook violently, as if it was collapsing. It crushed down on the 10,000 sword Empyrean. At this moment, the sword peak shattered. Countless sword chi currents collapsed within the palm chi. Sword lights were constantly crushed and shattered. Sho Wuck furrowed his brows, and a majestic sword chi burst forth for the second time. The Daozong Peak's Monarch technique, Empress was Holy Spirit mantra, was unleashed. The Emperor's light around his body completely solidified. Even though his arms were trembling, his sword fingers were extremely tough. Sword chi continuously flew out from his fingertips and merged back into the 10,000 sword celestial peak. Boundless sword will and sword chi were boundless. At this moment, Sho Wuck's sword chi became even sharper. A series of ding ding dang dang sounds could be heard as the sword chi collided with the palm print. Finally, with a poochie sound, the sword chi pierced through the palm print. More and more holes appeared on the palm print, turning into countless holes. The sword chi pierced through the palm print and flew towards the old man. Bang! A powerful and heavy blow, along with countless holes in the terrifying palm print, still blasted on his Sho Wuck's body. He was born with the ability to pierce through rules of the sword, but he was unable to tear the palm print apart. He could only pierce through it with his sword aura. A mouthful of blood spurted out crazily. The palm print pressed down on Sho Wuck and fell into the city, causing countless buildings to collapse. However, the old man's face was equally shocked. He was a fifth firmament Yuan the Arch, yet he was pierced through by Sho Wuck's sword. What kind of sharp sword intent was this? In the next second, what entered the old man's eyes was tens of thousands of sword chi currents flying over, burying him in the sword light. Break for me. The old man finally realized the danger. The emperor light around his body raged violently, wanting to block the sword chi from reaching him. Just as he moved, a huge blood mist suddenly appeared in front of him, and an incomparably smelly blood light swept him into it. The old man fell into the blood mist, and the blood in his body flowed in reverse. He couldn't control it at all, and it overflowed out of his body. It even accelerated the aging of his internal organs. He was horrified to discover that his arch body was withering and aging. "You dog slave, how dare you hurt my master? Old demon, I will fight you to the death." The old demon bared his teeth and glared. On his head, a green hat emitted a strange radiance of laws, crazily surging towards the blood mist that surrounded the old man. As the blood emperor of Western Liang in his previous life, the old demon comprehended the laws to control the flow of the enemy's blood and accelerate the aging of the archbody. If it wasn't for the old man's cultivation being so much higher than his, he would have died of old age. In these 3 years, the old demon desperately dual cultivated with Yi Ninghong, and only then did he return to his peak and step into the second firmament, the arch realm again. The old man's hoarse howl sounded in the void. The pain of having his bloodline reversed by the enemy's laws in a fierce battle was unimaginable. At this moment, not only was he enduring the invasion of the old demon's laws, but his body was also forcibly distorted. His essence chi was in chaos, and his meridians were exploding one by one. At this moment, Sho Wuck's 10,000 sword heavenly peak pierced into the blood mist. Terrifying sword lights flashed, carrying terrifying piercing laws, piercing into the old man's weak body and into his divine soul, piercing countless holes in his divine soul, causing him to suffer fatal injuries. Boom! A thunderous explosion spread out, shaking heaven and earth. The surging Tao might scatter the old demon's laws, and the blood mist was evaporated in one strike. "Damn you, you actually self-destructed. The old demon stretched his neck, and like a rooster crowing, he spat out a mouthful of blood. His eyes rolled back, and he fell from the sky. The self-destruction of a fifth firmament, the arch, was ferocious. The old man knew that he couldn't escape this calamity, so he used the self-destruction method to severely injure the old demon. Even if his arch body was destroyed, he had to drag the Zheng dynasty's Emperor Yuan down with him. It had to be said that the old demon was also very unlucky. Swoosh! A broken divine soul beam flew out from the aftermath straight into the sky and fled towards the top of the sky. Xinyuan Gaoyan was there. The old man's arch body was destroyed, and his divine soul was also severely injured. He needed to hurry back to Xinyuan Gaoyan's side and use the power of the arch realm to protect his life. Die! But how could Xiao Han let the old man do as he wished? In this battle, Shou Wuk and the old demon had been conserving their strength. They were waiting for this moment to surprise and kill Emperor Yuan of the Xinyuan family, reversing the battle between the thearchs. The sacred crown appeared, filled with endless light, radiating the entire sky, turning into a divine light cage that suppressed everything. Xiao Han's body was like a graceful swan. The jade water sword in her hand quickly pierced towards the old man's remnant soul. This sword wasn't the jade water sword from before. It was the sword that Qin Hao received from Li Wanji in the Hidden Dragon Mystic Realm. It was the sword of Empress Xiantian, a ninth forged arch artifact. Empress Xiantian was the celestial Lord Xiantian of the Divine Palace. This sword was a relic of the celestial Lord Xiantian. After everyone returned from the Divine Palace, Qin Hao handed this sword to Xiao Han. The divine light of the crown turned into a prison that sealed the void, and a majestic empress appeared. Her terrifying spiritual light shone on the old man's remnant soul. The old man's remnant soul was suppressed by Xiao Han's spiritual force, and he screamed in horror. Puchi! Immediately afterward, a jade water sword pierced into the ethereal remnant soul, and an even more surging spiritual Tao intent invaded it. With the help of the sword of Xintian Peak, Xiao Han directly tore the old man's remnant soul into pieces. Imperial sword no! An angry and unwilling roar resounded through the world. An Emperor Yuan of the Xinyuan family had fallen. The second Emperor Yuan. In the distant void, countless southern region cultivators who were watching the battle were shocked. As the fierce battle passed, Emperor Yuan had already begun to die. First, an elder of the Night Luo Palace had his arch body shattered. Then, the situation changed, and the strongest elder of the Xinyuan family was also killed. He was directly killed, and his divine soul was destroyed. In contrast, the death of the old man was even more shocking. After all, this Emperor Yuan was killed by the joint efforts of three inferior essence Qi cultivators. The weak defeated the strong. Makamanji, isn't the sword sect only here to enjoy the scenery? Great anger suddenly appeared on Sun God's face, and golden light burst out from his eyes like two burning divine flames. In an instant, the dozen or so lava giants at the top of the sky let out roars as if they had gone mad, venting their anger on behalf of their master. The sword sect is here to enjoy the scenery, but Wuk's current position is not that of the sword sect. Makamanji rubbed his nose and said, Shou Wuk's identity was that of a disciple of the Divine Palace, the same as Qin Hao. The void was quiet. The silence was terrifying, revealing infinite oppression. Sun God stared coldly at Makamanji. In order to avoid fighting with the other party, he could endure and not participate in this battle, provided that the sword sect also did not intervene. But Makamanji lied to him. Kill! An extremely cold order came out of Sun God's mouth. Boom! 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 Countless balls of flames from the holy temple flew down from the void. Within each ball of flames was a holy temple expert. These beams of flames with powerful auras fell towards the battle in the city, like a sea of fire falling from the sky. Chapter 1586. The sea of fire shrouded the sky and poured into the city. The scene was spectacular. I've long heard that the Sacred Hall's fire spells are profound. Today, I'm fortunate enough to meet them. Go and experience it. Makamanji instructed. Above the sky, all the cultivators of the Sword Clan moved, including Elder Meng. Beams of sword light fell from the sky and flew towards the figures in the sea of fire to intercept them. Every beam of sword light that came into contact with them blocked a cultivator of the Sage Halls. Suddenly, countless sword lights in the sky weaved into a vast sword net. The sword sect's sword aura connected and shrouded the imperial city, forcibly blocking the sea of fire. In an instant, the experts from both sides fought. This scene made the Zhanwu spectators of the southern region sigh. Two more Overlord-level forces were in a battle. The Sacred Hall wanted to help Nan Ao reverse the situation, but the Sword Sect didn't let them and blocked them. Since when did the Zheng clan have such a close relationship with the Sword Sect? Most people didn't know the reason. Only the martial artists who had been to the Golden Light City auction house could guess that the Sword Sect might have made a move for Qin Hao. At this moment, Emperor Yuan's subordinates were fighting. Sword aura and flames crisscrossed in the sky. Sun God and the Sword the Arch still didn't move. Although Sun God's face was filled with anger, he still tried his best to restrain himself. He didn't want to become enemies with Makamanji. However, the Sacred Hall was restrained by the Sword Sect and couldn't come to their aid. This made Xinyuan Gaoyan anxious. The 8-winged black dragon was restless, releasing a tyrannical dragon aura. Emperor Xinyuan took a step forward and was about to make a move. Buzz! Yininghong also took a step forward. The demonic Oriole chirped and stared at the other party. If Xinyuan Gaoyan made a move, she would definitely fight him. Wuing, retreat to the Divine Hall. Xinyuan Gaoyan secretly clenched his fists. He looked at Yi Ninghong with eyes full of killing intent and shouted towards the sky below. The strongest elder in the clan was killed. Nan Ao couldn't gain the upper hand in the battle between the Thearchs. It was completely imaginable what Xiao Han and Shouwuk would do next. They would definitely help the Thearchs on the battlefield and expand Knight Luo Palace's advantage. As a result, Emperor Yuan was even more unable to do anything. He was trapped both internally and externally. Qin Hao chased after him like a madman. His progress in cultivation was astonishing. If Xinyuan Wuing wanted to survive, the only way to survive was to hide in the Divine Temple and enter the core of the protective formation. Inside the city, after Xiao Han killed the old man's remnant soul, she glanced in the direction of Qin Hao. She saw a tall figure coming out of the ruins aggressively. Surrounded by blood-red devil flames, he raised his sword and rushed towards Xinyuan Wuing. Even though she wanted to go over and fight with him, Xiao Han knew in her heart that it was a duel between men. It was not convenient for her to intervene. Otherwise, he would be belittling Qin Hao's self-esteem. Turning around, Xiao Han flew up into the sky like a graceful swan. A graceful sword light slashed toward Emperor Yuan of the Xinyuan family. Her mission now was to help Knight Luo Palace reverse their disadvantage in the Thearchs. Spit! Qin Hao spat out a stone and finally regained his consciousness. His scarlet eyes stared at Xinyuan Wuing again. His huge spiritual power locked onto his opponent. The water wind god took a step forward and swept through the air like a gust of wind. It was as fast as a rainbow as it headed straight for the target. Go and protect Kerer, Ahei, Huang, and Jiuing. Kill Emperor Yuan of the Xinyuan family. The interspatial ring flickered, and 4 extremely violent auras drilled out. The dog spirit flapped its wings and landed in Xiao Er's position. Even though she had the protection of the Imperial Rainbow Ribbon, her physical body wasn't as strong as Qin Hao's, and her injuries weren't light. The Centaur brothers held the purple-gold thunder hammers in their hands. When the hammers collided, the sound waves of the great Tao vibrated. Thunder flash wrapped around the hammers as they stepped on Jiu Ying's broad back and went straight to the weakest elder of the Xinyuan family. Jiu Ying was the beast emperor of the internal sea, and Ahei Huang was also an extreme human sovereign. Although they hadn't transcended the Arch Tribulation, their resistance was extremely strong. In fact, their offensive power was definitely not weaker than that of a lower-level Emperor Yuan. With them and Shao Han in the Battle of the Thearchs, the Southern AO Thearchs would usher in the end. At this time, Qin Hao only had Xin Yuan Wuying in his eyes. Wherever he hid, he would chase. He had to kill this person. Xin Yuan Wuying saw Qin Hao rushing over again. He didn't die after being hit by Emperor Yuan, and his speed was superb. Even though his body was covered in blood, his eyes were as fierce and terrifying as a demon. At this time, Xin Yuan Gaoyan's shout sounded above his head. He didn't dare to hesitate any longer and turned around to fly towards the temple. The battlefield was chaotic, and the aura of the strong was dense. The space of the great Tao was unstable, and it was impossible to tear through space to teleport. He could only desperately fly away from Qin Hao, that monster. Xin Yuan Wuying probably never thought that one day he would be in such a sorry state. The dignified second prince of Southern AO was being chased by a junior, and he had no way to deal with the other party. Two streams of light, one in front and one behind, chased crazily. The warriors they encountered on the way were all shocked to death by the vital qi of the two. In contrast, Qin Hao's speed was even crazier, and the distance between him and Xin Yuan Wuying was constantly shortening. Before the other party hid in the temple, it was very likely that he would be caught. However, this wasn't the only scene on the vast battlefield. In another area, there were also two figures chasing crazily, one in front and one behind. The suffocating sense of crisis was not inferior to that of Qin Hao and Xin Yuan Wuying. It was Su Jin and Chang Lo. At this time, in the Guangbao area on the right side of the temple, Su Jin was flying in the air. The Emperor's light shone on his body, and as he flew, a rhythm of the great path came from his body. In front of him, Chang Lo was the fastest to escape. Behind Chang Lo was a large group of high-level members of the Spirit Beast clan. However, the cultivation of the people of the Spirit Beast clan was weak, and their speed was not as fast as Chang Lo's, let alone Su Jin's. The light of the sound technique shrouded the front, and anyone from the Spirit Beast clan who was caught in it was immediately buried in the Alchemy sound technique, and not even their spiritual souls remained. In a moment, there were only a few people left behind Chang Lo. "You must die today," Su Jin said. Su Jin spoke while his eyes were suffused with strands of blood, and his tone actually faintly carried the hatred of Su Jin's true body. If it weren't for Chang Lo, Lan Qingwu wouldn't have died, Su Jin himself wouldn't have died, and Gooden wouldn't have lost his physical body and borrowed Su Jin's body to be resurrected and walk the world under another person's name. Everything was just Chang Haloa's personal vendetta, causing them to become innocent sacrificial lambs. Chang Halo heard the words coming from behind him, but he didn't respond. He instinctively surged his vital qi and fled to the temple, hiding under the fence of the Xianyuan family. He knew many secrets of the Xianyuan family. The temple was the source of the great matrix protecting the family, and its defensive power was amazing. It was his only hope of survival. The sound waves of the great path swept out, and Su Jin pursued closely. Two flowing lights pierced through the sky, and coincidentally, they ran into Qin Hao, who was chasing after Xin Yuan Wuying. In an instant, the four of them gathered together. Chapter 1587. Chang Lo and Xin Yuan Wuying were both extremely fast. They flew towards the center, one on the left and one on the right. They almost collided into each other. Fortunately, they turned around quickly and began to move forward side by side. At this moment, the two of them subconsciously looked at each other. Their eyes met, and the same bitterness arose in their hearts. It was really the end of the world. They were forced into such a situation. Behind them, Qin Hao and Su Jin had also gathered together. However, in comparison, Qin Hao's speed was much faster than Su Jin's. The water wind god's steps were extremely fast, instantly widening the distance between them and the two who were fleeing in front of them. Do you think you can escape? Qin Hao's left hand smashed forward. The power of the art of endless samsara swept out and covered the top of Xianyuan Wuying and Changhe Lo's heads. An invisible force sealed the space and blocked their way forward. Xianyuan Wuying was shocked. He felt that the space around him began to solidify. It was like a cage. In this situation, there was no escape. His gaze fell on Changhe Lo. Xianyuan Wuying's eyes flashed. His right hand suddenly pressed forward and clasped onto Changhe Lo's shoulder. The Yuan Qi in his body was raging. An extremely powerful force gathered in the palm of his hand. Changhe Lo felt his shoulder sink. An external force surged. His body began to lose control. He suddenly turned his head. When he saw Xianyuan Wuying's eyes, he immediately guessed what he was going to do. He was preparing to use him as a shield and abandon him. Humph! Changhe Lo snorted coldly. He turned around and slammed his palm on Xianyuan Wuying's chest. Now, he was no longer the Changhe Lo of the past. He had enough strength to walk the path he had chosen. He didn't need to care about Xianyuan Wuying's attitude, nor did he need to be manipulated by him. Bang! This palm hit Xianyuan Wuying heavily. The turbulent rules and Tao intent penetrated his body, shattering his bones and shaking his organs. Xianyuan Wuying, who had been severely injured, spat a mouthful of blood on Changhe Lo's face. He looked surprised. Although he was a little surprised, Xianyuan Wuying was not too surprised. According to Changhe Lo's character, this counterattack was within his expectations. However, Xianyuan Wuying's hand on Changhe Lo's shoulder didn't relax at all. Instead, he gathered more and more strength without holding back. Then, he grabbed Changhe Lo's body and threw him forward with all his might. He said, "Live." Whoosh! Changhe Lo's body was wrapped in the bright light of Renhuang. This power almost sucked out all of Xianyuan Wuying's vitality. Like a shooting star, he shuttled out of the solid space in an instant. Changhe Lo was stunned. He turned back to look at Xianyuan Wuying. The face that had disgusted him was becoming more and more blurry and unfamiliar. Why? He asked his heart. Why did he save him instead of abandoning him? Why? At this moment, Xianyuan Wuying was also asking himself. He obviously wanted to grab Changhe Lo and throw him at Qin Hao. However, when he saw Changhe Lo's eyes, apart from anger, there was also a trace of panic. He looked like a frightened child. This look was very similar to Xianyuan Feng's when he was dying. Anger towards Qin Hao. Panic, fear of death. Presumably, before Fenger died, he also called for his father to save him from the bottom of his heart. Buzz. Space was frozen. The power of the domain shrouded down and separated Xianyuan Wuying and Changhe Lo. These two people also ushered in different endings. You want to kill me? It's not that easy. Xianyuan Wuying turned around. His weak body unbelievably burst into a mass of vast light. He raised his remaining arm above his head. The Renhuang's spiritual soul followed the vast light and soared into the 9 heavens. It seemed to merge with the great path of heaven and earth. Boom! Crack! Above this part of the world, thunderclouds appeared out of thin air. A ray of light of catastrophe of the great path flashed. The light became more and more terrifying, and the might of the way was oppressive. Imperial catastrophe. Qin Hao suddenly stopped and looked up. Xianyuan Wuying had summoned the Imperial catastrophe. Did he want to use the Imperial catastrophe to block it, so that Changhe Lo could escape smoothly? Buzz. The sound of a flute flowed and spread. The notes swept in all directions and became more and more intense. Su Jin's soul flute was placed under his lips. The imperial light around him was dazzling. Back then, he could take away Yu Luxin's catastrophe. Today, he could also kill Xianyuan Wuying. No need. Qin Hao turned around and said. After that, he stepped forward step by step. The great void sword in his hand was covered with a thick layer of bloody light. It was as if blood was about to drip out. The red lotus fire around him burned more and more violently. Whether Xianyuan Wuying wanted to pass the catastrophe to become an emperor or use the imperial catastrophe to block him, it was just wishful thinking. Boom! Crack! The clouds of catastrophe moved extremely fast. At the top of the sky, the millstone of the great path formed was rolling. A ray of terrifying light of catastrophe struck down from the sky to the ground. It blasted towards Xin Yuan Wuying and swallowed his entire body. Xin Yuan Wuying was hit by the first ray of catastrophe. He let out an extremely tragic cry. When he was in his prime, he did not have the confidence to pass the imperial catastrophe. Now, how could he withstand it with this broken body? Boom! The first ray of catastrophe fell. Immediately, the second ray of catastrophe struck down and hit Xin Yuan Wuying again. The might of the great path that drowned him was even more terrifying. At this moment, Xin Yuan Wuying felt as if his soul had flown out of his body. He was going to be buried in the light of catastrophe and torn to pieces by the great path. Rays of catastrophe struck down continuously. There were 36 tribulations of the great path. Every time one of them fell, Xin Yuan Wuying would spit out a mouthful of blood. It was as if he had spat out his internal organs. His broken body became more and more broken. His aura seemed to be turning into nothingness. If he could not withstand it, it was obvious that he had no chance of passing the catastrophe to become an emperor. But this was also good. Dying in the imperial catastrophe was better than dying in the hands of Qin Hao. At the very least, Chang Elo had survived. His body was broken little by little. The spiritual aura that had merged with the great path seemed to be torn apart. Xin Yuan Wuying, who was trapped in the light of catastrophe, was about to reach the end of his life. Death? You can only die in my hands. Qin Hao's eyes were bleeding. His footsteps rumbled. His dragonized body was extremely majestic. He ignored the catastrophe of the great path and rushed directly into the light of catastrophe with his sword. Seeing this scene, Su Jin's heart trembled. Although the disciples of the Divine Palace had been tempered, and their spiritual souls and bodies were far stronger than those of the Runhuang outside, when he seized the heart of music's imperial catastrophe, he released the rules of the great path in advance to protect himself. But Qin Hao was like a madman. Without any preparation, he directly charged in. Su Jin cannot describe it. The blood-colored long sword pierced into the light of catastrophe. The power of the great path in the sky smashed into Qin Hao's back. Even in his dragonized state, the soles of his feet were still a little weak. But immediately, Qin Hao stood firm. He stared at the broken body in the light of catastrophe and stabbed forward. With a crack, it penetrated Xin Yuan Wuying's heart. At this moment, Qin Hao was like a madman. He bore the imperial catastrophe of the great path and directly stabbed Xin Yuan Wuying with his sword. Between his palms, he accurately nailed Xin Yuan Wuying's heart. Bang, bang, bang. Along the way, countless palaces were destroyed. Everywhere the two of them passed was turned into ruins. Finally, Qin Hao stopped. His body was still wrapped in the light of the imperial catastrophe. He stood in midair and looked coldly ahead. He saw that in front of him, there was an ancient tower. Xin Yuan Wuying's body was pressed against it. His head was lowered. Streaks of blood flowed down his messy hair. His chest was penetrated by a blood-colored longsword. It was as if he was hanging from the ancient tower. There was endless desolation. There was no longer any trace of life. His spiritual soul was torn apart by the sword will. The second prince of Nan Ao had fallen. Qin Hao glared at Xin Yuan Wuying's body. Even though he had successfully killed him, the hatred in his heart did not lessen. If the two armies were not fighting at this moment, and Xin Yuan Gaoyan was watching from the top of the sky, he would never have let Xin Yuan Wuying die so easily. This sword was too easy for him. Wuying, in the void, Xin Yuan Wuba sensed that Xin Yuan Wuying's aura had disappeared. His heart suddenly turned cold. It was as if the line that connected the two brothers had been broken. When he looked down at the battlefield, he happened to see Xin Yuan Wuying's chest pierced by a sword and nailed to the top of the most eye-catching ancient tower in the imperial city. At this moment, Xin Yuan Wuba's mind exploded. His eyes immediately turned red. He opened his mouth, but he could not make any sound. It was as if the memories of his childhood were just yesterday. Qin Hao, I will kill you. A bestial roar resounded through the world. It was as if a person was being skinned. It was so painful. He turned around and punched old ancestor Zheng's face. He no longer cared about this old thing that could not be killed. The emperor light that Xin Yuan Wuba emitted was majestic to the extreme. His sixth-layer Yuan emperor cultivation shattered the void. He ignored the many Yuan emperors who were fighting around him and tore the space apart. His fierce aura was directly above Qin Hao's head. Puffed, puffed, poof. In an instant, the soul power surged, and the space shook violently. Whether it was the elders of the Night Luo Palace, the elders of the Xinyuan family branch, Shaohan, or Jiuing, they were all caught off guard. They vomited blood from Xinyuan Wuba's Berserk Emperor aura. However, at the same time, in the southwest direction of the imperial city, an extremely terrifying emperor light tore the space apart. It was like a beam of sword aura that tore the world apart. Its pressure was even stronger than Xinyuan Wuba's. There was a loud rumble. The two emperor lights collided across the sky. Heaven and earth shook, and many palaces in the city were uprooted uncontrollably. They rose into the sky and instantly collapsed into powder. At this moment, not far from Qin Hao, two figures were facing each other across the sky. Who is it? Xinyuan Wuba was surprisingly calm. His domineering eyes were staring at the figure opposite him with rolling pressure. It was as if Qin Hao had nothing to do with him at this moment. Dan Ji's subordinate, slaying the clan and slaying Wenjia. A domineering middle-aged man with a sharp face and a blade in his hand replied in a deep voice. His voice was powerful. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. Countless streams of light shot over from the same direction as the domineering middle-aged man. They were like beams of sharp sword aura. Southern region's slaying sect participating in the battle. Zhang Ye's voice spread and entered Qin Hao's ears. Chapter 1588. The Zhan clan was the clan of Zhan Lang, one of the four divine generals under Dindi in Daqin. After Dinda fell, the Zhan clan escaped from Daqin and wandered in the southern region. They changed their name to Zhan sect and hid in a mysterious place. No one could find the entrance to the place. In the southern region, there had been some rumors about Zhan sect. The warriors in the southern region didn't know much about it. They only knew that Zhan sect saber techniques were peerless, and they had many masters. They were as strong as a first-rate sect. After returning from the inland sea, Zhang Yi left the group and returned to Zhan sect alone to bring back this lost tribe for Qin Hao. Strictly speaking, this was a member of Qin Hao's direct line of descent. But the journey was not easy. There was a terrible saber matrix outside the sect. No matter who it was, if they wanted to come back after leaving the sect, they had to go through the saber matrix. This was a rule set by the clan. The saber matrix was unpredictable. Every time it was invaded, the attack of the matrix was different. It was difficult for those who were not brave and powerful to break through. Only the Renhuang level masters in the clan were qualified to enter and leave. The weaker members had almost no possibility of leaving the clan. This was also to make it easier to protect the young people in the clan. After cultivating in the Divine Palace for 3 years, Zhang Yi had entered the half-step Saber Emperor realm. However, the Saber Matrix was stronger than the opponent. He spent a lot of energy and fought until he was covered in wounds. Only then did he pass the test and return to the clan. Then, he told his father what had happened. The father and son rushed into the place where the Zhan sect patriarch was cultivating in seclusion and woke him up. The whole clan rushed here without stopping. Time was tight. For Zhang Yi, he had almost no rest. If he was not fighting, he was having an epiphany in the Saber Matrix. But for the outside world, he went for more than a month and almost missed the battle. Fortunately, he finally made it. The middle-aged man who stopped Xinyuan Wuba was Zhang Ye's father, Zhan Wenjia, a cultivator of the 7th level of the Yuan Emperor realm. At this moment, beams of saber light flew through the air like a large meteor. The light shrouded the sky and blasted into the battle. Those terrifying saber chi with a platinum luster were all saber emperors. They directly slashed toward the elder of the Xianyuan clan. The Ren Wang of the Zhan clan rode the saber light into the city. Endless saber chi rushed back and forth, stirring up a terrifying bloody rain wherever it passed. 9 heavens consecutive slashes die. Zhan Yi roared. He held the door-like tyrant blade in his hand. From a distance, he continuously slashed out. Each slash was stronger than the previous one. 9 beams of blade light broke through the air, tearing the space apart. Finally, they condensed into a terrifying blade light that landed on Emperor Yuan, who was fighting with Xiao Han. Emperor Yuan was injured by the joint attack of Xiao Han and Jiuying. He was already in a precarious situation. Suddenly, a domineering saber aura descended from the top of his head. It was as if the world was being cut apart. In the end, Zhan Yi slashed him into nothingness. Emperor Realm of Zhan Yi nodded. Yes, Zhan Yi nodded. When he broke through the saber formation, his saber intent was perfected. Now, he was the same as Shou Wuk, a first-level Emperor Realm cultivator. Kill. After killing one Emperor Yuan of the Xianyuan clan, Zhan Yi turned and pounced on another person. He waved his saber repeatedly. Zhan Dili pierced all the major acupoints in his body. His saber intent became even more violent. Xiao Han smiled. He took a break to watch the battle. At this moment, no matter what level the battle was, the Xianyuan clan was at a disadvantage. The arrival of the Zhan clan cultivator completely crushed this overlord. At this moment, in a certain area of the city, the space was terrifyingly silent. The oppressive atmosphere was suffocating. Zhan Wenjie and Xianyuan Wuba looked at each other across the air. Neither of them said anything more. Whoosh! Between heaven and earth, a wisp of domineering blade chi flowed out of Wenjie's body and instantly formed a violent hurricane of blade chi, which wrapped around his body and rose into the void bit by bit. Emperor Light flickered around Xianyuan Wuba's body as he slowly rose into the sky. He could sense an extremely strong threat from his opponent's aura. He realized that this person was far more difficult to deal with than the Battle King, Duan Zhanfei. Although Xianyuan Wuba's cultivation had broken through from the 4th level of the Yuan Emperor Realm to the 6th level of the Yuan Emperor Realm, he still didn't have much of a chance of winning against Zhan Wenjie. He even had a feeling that he might die in this battle. Whoosh! A halberd fell into his hand. Imperial light circled it, and the might of the Great Path emanated from it. It was an imperial implement. Xianyuan Wuba held the halberd in his hand, and with a sweep of the halberd, dazzling platinum light filled the sky. It was as if the murderous airflow of the Great Path had been triggered, which swallowed Zhan Wenjie whole. Zhan Wenjie stepped forward and slowly raised his palm. It was slightly above his head, and he suddenly slashed downwards, drawing out an extremely dazzling blade chi. Intense light of rules flowed like a mad dragon in the sky, piercing through the killing aura that filled the sky. Immediately, the killing aura was reduced to nothing. Kill! The two of them roared at the same time, and the similarly domineering figures collided with each other. With a boom, the sky and earth seemed to collapse. Immediately after, they separated and collided again. The two imperial lights intertwined and separated in the void. Every time they collided, countless cultivators below felt as if they were going to be shaken to death. Qinha took a deep breath. His body was covered with wounds, and blood kept flowing out. He stared at Xianyuan Wuying's corpse on the ancient pagoda. His palms stretched out slightly, and the great void divine sword was guided back. It gradually changed from crimson to the original emerald light. Then, Xianyuan Wuying's corpse slid down the ancient pagoda and fell into the dirty soil of the city. At this time, Qinha looked up at the void above at the battle between Zhan Wenjie and Xianyuan Wuba. He smiled slightly and said, "The descendant of Zhan Lang." Zhan Wenjie's domineering blade was even thicker than Zhan Yi's. It made Qinha feel very close to him. It was as if there was a shadow of Zhan Lang in the rushing blade light in the sky. Boom! Crack! A glaring light of catastrophe fell with a thunderous sound, waking Qin Hao up. Qin Hao was not sure if it was because he was stained with Xianyuan Wuying's blood. His blood qi was filled with Xianyuan Wuying's remaining aura. The Emperor's trial in the sky did not disperse. Instead, it condensed even more intensely. A surge of power of catastrophe, as thick as a thunder python, snaked down and crashed toward Qin Hao. Well, it's time to return to the Imperial realm. Qin Hao put away the Great Void Divine Sword and dispelled his dragonized state. His body was empty, as if he had turned from a crazy demon into an ordinary person. There was not a trace of vitality in his body. He opened his arms and closed his eyes slightly. He rushed toward the descending light of catastrophe. It felt as if he was going to dedicate himself to it. 36 major Tao catastrophes. This should be the 19th one. The poor second prince of Nan Ao could not even withstand 19 streaks of power of catastrophe. At this moment, even the heavens wanted Qin Hao to become an emperor. However, he would not use Xianyuan Wuying's emperor's trial to return to the state of Dindi in his previous life. The remaining power of catastrophe was not enough to refine a perfect emperor's body. It was far from enough. Boom! Crack! The light of catastrophe swallowed Qin Hao. Countless warriors watching the battle were shocked. Xianyuan Wuying was dead, but the emperor's trial did not disperse. The power of catastrophe of the Great Tao was crashing toward Qin Hao. At present, the entire imperial city was in a fierce battle. Qin Hao was actually going through the emperor's trial to refine an emperor's body. Creak! In the sky, Xianyuan Gaoyan clenched his fists. Blue veins appeared on his fists. His face was hideous. Pain. Even though he was a sovereign lord and had proven his way, he still could not cut off his mortal desires. Seeing Xianyuan Wuying die in battle, his rock-hard heart seemed to be pierced by a sharp chisel. This feeling, which he had not experienced for a long time, swept through his body at this moment, filling every nerve. Don't worry. Today, everyone here will be buried with you. Xianyuan Gaoyan's clenched fists slowly loosened, and he returned to being the arrogant sovereign lord of Xianyuan. However, the anger in his eyes was even stronger, especially when he looked at the battlefield. With the entry of the southern region's Zhanzong, the Xianyuan family army was completely crushed. They were completely powerless to turn the situation around. The great Xia dynasty was in danger. Li Yuan, are you still not going to make a move? Xianyuan Gaoyan looked at the sovereign of the northern region, Li Yuan. He gritted his teeth and squeezed out a hoarse voice from the gaps between his teeth. The sage palace was restrained by the sword sect and could not support the battle. In the city, the Xianyuan family army was retreating again and again. 4 of the 5 Renhuang battle formations were destroyed, and their foundation was damaged. Zhanzong's entry into the formation became the last straw that broke the southern region's back. It made the situation extremely bad. Emperor Yuan was even killed, and the southern region's imperial realm was also in danger. The only ones who had the ability and qualifications to help them were the northern region's divine nation and the Li family. Make a move. Li Yuan pretended to be stunned for a moment. He smiled slightly and said, like Makamanji, I'm also here to enjoy the scenery. What did you say? Xianyuan Gaoyan took a heavy step towards the northern region's formation. He seemed to have broken a tooth in his mouth. An unprecedented rage appeared on his face, and his facial features were distorted. The southern region and the northern region's pride came from the same source. If not, he would not have asked Li Yuan for help before the battle and given him an Empyrean artifact as a reward. After that, he would have divided the Myriad Cultivator Alliance and Knight Luo Palace with the Li family. It was a win-win situation. But what did Li Yuan say to him? When he needed help, the northern region's pride sovereign said to him, I am here to enjoy the scenery. Xianyuan Gaoyan. Li Yuan also took a step forward. He tore off his friendly facade and revealed a greedy and terrifying expression. He said coldly, understand the current situation of your family. Do you want to add another opponent to your family and become enemies with my Li family? A threat, a naked threat. At this moment, the way Li Yuan looked at Xian Yuan Gaoyan changed. It was as if he was looking at a prisoner. There was even a trace of pity and sympathy in his eyes. Today, the Li family will not interfere and punish the Xian Yuan family's sins together with the many heroes of the southern region's righteous path. Help you? Why should I help you? The northern region's Pride Li family does not owe the southern region's Pride sovereign. If you think I'm wrong, then I don't mind fighting with you. The Proud God Empire had been divided into two. The Li family had given half of the empire to the Xian Yuan clan. Did they owe the southern region's Pride sovereign? Did they owe the southern region's Pride sovereign? The southern region's Pride sovereign no longer existed after the death of the first generation's ancestors. Ha ha! Xian Yuan raised his head and laughed wildly. Naive. The dignified Xian Yuan Gaoyan could be so naive. That's right. Everyone kicks a man who is down. The northern region's Pride Li family had always had the ambition to unify the Proud God Empire. He actually believed that Xian Yuan Gaoyan would help the southern region's Pride sovereign. Laughable. Too laughable. Too naive. I feel sorry for the Li family's ancestors. Xian Yuan Gaoyan said softly. Then, his eyes flashed with boundless ruthlessness. He was caught off guard by a majestic emperor's palm that pressed down from the sky into the city. A crazy roar resounded through the world. Today, I will show you the true strength of the southern region's Pride sovereign. If you want to die, then let's die together. Chapter 1589. Xian Yuan Gaoyan's palm strike entered the city and arrived instantly, catching everyone off guard. The thearchs and lords' expressions changed, including Yining Hong. Although they were on guard, they were still one step too slow, and it was too late to stop it. Rumble. The majestic palm strike crushed everything in its path, and the void seemed to collapse. Countless cracks appeared in the space, and it was unstoppable. How tyrannical was a great emperor! Their movements and stillness were integrated with the great Tao. Their will was the Tao, and their body was the Tao. The terror of their oppressive aura was far from what Xian Yuan Wuba could compare to. Any large powerhouse would be suppressed by this palm light. However, Xian Yuan Gaoyan did not condense too much power in this palm strike, and it was not enough to cover the entire imperial city. Yining Hong would not give him the chance to do so. Moreover, his goal was not to destroy the city. He knew that he would not be able to kill everyone in the city with this palm strike. His real goal was the temple. The magnificent temple was suspended in mid-air in the center of the city. It was majestic, and it radiated with supreme power. It was like the temple of the gods, and it was awe-inspiring. The temple was not only the palace of the thearchs, but it was also the source of the protective formation. Xian Yuan Gaoyan wanted to open the second layer of formation power. Only the arch Xian Yuan could activate the second layer of formation power. When the time came, a terrifying offensive Tao would erupt, and all living beings in the city would be attacked. Relying on the protective formation, it would be enough to raise the imperial city to the ground in an instant. Buzz! A powerful palm strike broke through the air and pressed down, covering the temple. The two Tao intents came from the same source, and they could sense each other. The temple flickered with a dazzling brilliance, spewing out endless radiance. At that moment, the entire imperial city shook under the radiance. Then, the palm strike shattered, turning into countless specks of light that flooded the temple. For balls of platinum light emerged from the temple and turned into ribbons that flew toward the pillars at the four corners of the imperial city. In a flash, they disappeared into the huge pillars. Every formation pillar was being poured in by a waterfall. Rumble. The earth and mountains shook, and the void trembled as well. The earth and rocks in the city tumbled, and all the palaces collapsed one after another. A formless great Tao power radiated from the four pillars toward the center of the imperial city, gradually closing in and sealing the entire city. A suffocating sense of crisis invaded everyone's souls, and the desperate slaughter actually stopped at the same time. Numerous shocked gazes looked towards the four array pillars. The four pillars shook violently as the divine dragon, phoenix, black tortoise, qilin, and other divine beasts carved on the pillars gradually lit up as if blood was being injected into the meridians. The divine dragon, phoenix, black tortoise, qilin, and other divine beast patterns quickly spread up the pillars and covered the entire body of the divine beasts. Along with this, every time a part of the pattern was lit up, the stone pillars would shatter and turn into powder. The divine beasts in the pattern seemed to have become living creatures, emitting an incomparably powerful aura of life. The body of a dragon, the body of a phoenix, the back of a tortoise, flesh and blood gradually condensed. Roar! Finally, the four pillars collapsed at the same time, causing smoke and dust to rise into the sky. Inside the smoke and dust, one could faintly see gigantic creatures moving about. Their auras were comparable to sovereign lords, and with a light step, they caused the heavens and earth to tremble. I can't save my clansmen, but this formation can exterminate all invaders in the city. This is the guardian deity of the Xianyuan family. Take a good look at it. Xianyuan Gaoyan looked at the city and smiled. It was a helpless smile, a bitter smile, but also a smile of satisfaction. He had roped in the Sacred Hall and the Li family. He had originally thought that this battle would be smooth sailing, and he would eradicate the Zheng clan and Knight Luo Palace, allowing the Southern Proud Empire to regain its former glory. However, he had never imagined that things would turn out this way. Sovereign Realm defeated. Human Sovereign defeated. Yuan Venerate defeated. The army in the city had suffered countless casualties and was routed continuously. Now, the general situation was set, and the Southern Proud Empire was isolated. Even as the Sovereign Lord, Xianyuan Gaoyan could not rely on his own strength to reverse the situation. The only thing he could do was to drag everyone down with him and bury them with the Xianyuan family. In any case, the family had no friends or allies. The Sacred Hall had only taken action to avenge Yu Qianyang and to protect the dignity of the sect. The Li family had taken money to enjoy the scenery and were as indifferent as beasts. In this vast world, no force was willing to sincerely help the Xianyuan family. How sad was the dignified Xianyuan royal family. Then, let's perish together. From now on, the southern region would no longer have the Xianyuan family and any overlord. Whoosh! At the same time that the beast spirits were awakened, Xianyuan Gaoyan decisively took the initiative to attack. A ray of emperor light flashed out like lightning, and a palm suffused with the radiance of laws pressed down on the head of the Zheng family's elder. Boom! It was a one-hit kill, effortlessly. The Zheng family's elder struggled in fear, but his entire body was crushed by Xianyuan Gaoyan, and his soul was destroyed. The Sovereign Lord was so strong that even if Emperor Yuan stood in front of him, he would be slaughtered like a pig or a dog. Xianyuan Gaoyan sneered, and the radiance of Dao corroboration on his body was extremely dazzling. He moved once again. He took a step forward and teleported in front of the elders of the Nightnet Palace. His palms struck forward, and a terrifying gravity drowned out the void and rolled back toward his palms. Creak! Xianyuan Gaoyan's palms squeezed the throats of two Nightnet Palace elders. May the Nightnet Palace prosper forever. Knowing that he was powerless to escape, an elder shouted. There was no fear in his eyes, only endless glory and pride. Xianyuan Gaoyan. Yi Ninghong let out a shrill cry and turned into a dark ray of light, stabbing toward Xianyuan Gaoyan's back. The world was filled with extremely sharp, killing intent of Dao corroboration. In fact, when Xianyuan Gaoyan moved to kill Emperor Yuan of the Zheng family, Yi Ninghong had already made her move. But both sides were sovereign lords, and the other party made the first move, resulting in a situation where one side was faster than the other. A terrifying killing intent came from behind. Yi Ninghong's Dao corroboration, nomological power, surged into Xianyuan Gaoyan's body, causing him to feel cold. But he didn't stop. With a cold smile on his face, he exerted force with both palms, and the nomological power of Tao corroboration burst out, shattering the bodies of the Night Net Palace elders. Both of them died. Pucci. The dark ray of light pierced through. In the midst of the crisis, Xianyuan Gaoyan dodged to the side, and Yi Ninghong flew past him. A piece of his noble dragon robe fluttered in the wind. At this moment, a trace of blood flowed down from the blade that Yi Ninghong was holding tightly. It was the blood of its sovereign lord. However, Xianyuan Gaoyan didn't seem to feel anything. He turned around and stepped forward again. In a flash, a palm filled with the terrifying aura of death pressed down on the heads of Xiao Han and Zhang Yi. He knew that he was injured, but so what? He just wanted to kill to his heart's content. As for Yi Ninghong, he didn't care at all. Buzz. The heavy palm of the great Tao struck down. Xiao Han and Zhang Yi were imprisoned in place. Even though their nomological power erupted wildly, they were as weak as children in front of a Tao corroboration great emperor. This was the power of its sovereign lord. Emperor Yuan was like a god in the eyes of the outside world, but he was like an ant in front of a Tao corroboration great emperor. Even Yi Ninghong, who was also a sovereign lord, couldn't kill him. This was the reason why sovereign lords wouldn't easily intervene in low-level battles, because once they made a move, everything would be destroyed. It wasn't easy to stop them at all. One person was enough to kill everyone in the world. The same logic applied to Yi Ninghong. If she killed the descendants of the Xianyuan family at all costs, Xianyuan Gaoyan wouldn't be able to stop her. Because of fear, both sides didn't dare to act rashly. But now, the Xianyuan family was about to disappear from the world. Xianyuan Gaoyan had no more scruples. Even if he had to risk his life here, he would make the Night Net Palace and the Zheng clan pay the price. He would make sure that no one below the sovereign lords would live. Crazy. Looking at all this, Li Yuan's mood was a little turbulent. But it was also good. The Xianyuan family was destroyed, and the Zheng clan and Night Net Palace suffered heavy losses. It would only be beneficial for the Li family to control the Southern Proud Empire. Father, that woman can't die. At the critical moment, Li Yaqi anxiously reminded his father. He was talking about Xiao Han, Qin Hao's reverse scale. The reason why the Xianyuan family was in such a miserable situation today was because of Xiao Han. Why are you in such a hurry? Take your time. Li Yuan was very calm. He knew that on the Zheng clan's battleship, there was a powerful existence that could shake a sovereign lord. That person was a big shot of the Divine Palace. If the Divine Palace's powerhouses didn't make a move, what was the point of the Li family interfering? Xianyuan Gaoyan was crazy now, and Li Yuan didn't want to fight against a lunatic. If his sovereign body was injured, it wouldn't be good for him. Otherwise, why didn't Emperor Luo and Emperor Ning Wuming make a move? Swish! At the critical moment, an extremely domineering blade light slashed over, cutting the sky open and slashing in front of Xianyuan Gaoyan. This blade slashed down, directly cutting off his Tao corroboration great emperor. Bang! Xianyuan Gaoyan pressed both of his palms against the saber light. The terrifying saber intent rolled out, releasing an extremely vigorous energy. Xianyuan Gaoyan's arms went numb. He took a step back and steadied himself. He stared ahead. At this time, in front of Xiao Han and Zhang Yi, stood an old man with a white beard. The old man's hands were behind his back, and the light of Tao corroboration flickered around him. An extremely violent blade emanated from his body, and a pair of emotionless eyes stared coldly at Xianyuan Gaoyan. Tell me your name. Nameless people don't deserve to die in my hands, Xianyuan Gaoyan said. The old man opposite him had the same cultivation as him, perfected Tao corroboration great emperor. However, when the twos collided just now, the old man slid back several meters. Obviously, his foundation was not as good as Xianyuan Gaoyan's. He probably hadn't touched the sovereign lord level for long, and his realm was not very stable. Zhan Zong, Zhan Guanghe, the old man replied coldly. Zhan Zong was the master of Zhan Zong, a perfected ninth-tier sovereign lord, a Tao corroboration great emperor. When this voice came out, although it wasn't loud, It caused a sensation on the entire battlefield. Countless cultivators who came to watch the battle were so shocked that their mouths were wide open. They looked at the leader of Zhang, who was standing in the void. He was actually in Sovereign Lord. It turned out that Zhang wasn't a first-rate force, but was also an overlord. Moreover, it was a top overlord force with sovereign lords. The space was silent. Even Sword Emperor Makamanji, Sun God, Emperor Luo, Emperor Ningwu, and Li Yuan's hearts trembled at the same time. They didn't expect that apart from the three sovereigns and four sects, there was actually such a powerful force hidden in the southern region. The people behind Zhang were probably not simple. Xinyuan Gaiyan's shoulder-length black hair danced, and a hint of surprise flashed in his eyes. Zhang's patriarch, but that's all there is to it. Today, you will die. The first sovereign lord to die in the southern region will be you. Yi Ninghong's shrill and angry roar came from behind him. Endless Tao of annihilation pressed down. The space where Xinyuan Gaoyan was standing gradually turned dark. It wasn't a black fog, but the entire space solidified and turned into a pitch-black space. This was the seal of Tao corroboration, Great Emperor. In just a few breaths, Xinyuan Gaoyan killed 3 emperors from the Zheng clan and the Knight Luo Palace in one fell swoop. Xiaohan and Zhan Yi also almost died in his hands. How could Yi Ninghong not be worried? Zhang Guang he stopped Xinyuan Gaoyan's footsteps. Taking this opportunity, Yi Ninghong was able to use the Knight Luo Palace's Tao corroboration Great Emperor to seal him. In this way, the 3 of them could fight unscrupulously until one of them died. Take this girl away, Zhang Guang he said. After speaking, the domineering power in his body erupted and swept out, forming a terrifying sword Tao storm that resonated with heaven and earth. It was as if the great Tao of sword could cut through everything. Patriarch, you must be careful. After Zhan Yi finished speaking, he hurriedly retreated with Xiaohan. In the void, the sword sect, Blazing Sun Temple, Ningwu, Northern Pride, Li family, and various other forces emperors retreated one after another. In the following battle, even emperors weren't qualified to approach. Only sovereign lords could watch from a close distance. Chapter 1590. Above the sky, a suffocating cold air filled the air. A haze spread out, covering a large area like a black hole expanding, drowning the figures of the 3 great emperors. The martial artists outside could no longer see Xinyuan Gaoyan, Yi Ninghong, and Zhang. Countless pairs of eyes stared at the sky. Through the dark haze, they could only see 3 flickering platinum light spots. Each of them was extremely violent. They collided wildly, shaking out layers of cracks. At this moment, the emperors of the various forces retreated far away. Even Miyun's sect, Sun God, Emperor Luo, and the others silently retreated hundreds of feet. They raised their vigilance, and Emperor light surged around their bodies. They were constantly using their Emperor aura to protect their bodies. The 3 people in the haze were all Imperial Masters. This battle was a life and death battle. With the death of an Imperial Master, the power of the eruption could be imagined. Zhan Yi returned to the battleship and looked at the haze. He watched the 3 platinum light spots collide frequently. Even though he retreated far away, he could still clearly feel that the battle was very intense. Recalling the scene just now, he was suppressed by Xinyuan Gaoyan's Tao confirming rules. It was as if he was facing an unshakable mountain. Even though he tried his best to resist, it was useless. At this moment, he still felt a chill from the bottom of his heart. After Zhan Yi had an epiphany in the sword array and reached perfection in his Tao confirming rules, he took the opportunity to enter the Great Emperor realm. After mastering the power of Dili, he felt as if he was the only one in the world. He thought that he was strong enough, but in the face of Xinyuan Gaoyan, he was as weak as an ant. Tao confirming great emperors were simply terrifying. Now that he thought about it, he knew how strong the evil soul in the divine palace was. Miori, as an unblemished great emperor, delayed the evil soul for so long. She was also terrifying. This made Zhang Yi recognize his own position again. He was far from enough. I hope the ancestor is safe. Zhang Yi raised his head and said. Xinyuan Gaoyan was alone, while Zhan Zong and Yi Ninghong had joined forces. However, the battle between imperial masters was still extremely dangerous. You have to believe in the sword Dao of the Slayer clan. Xiaohan said softly. Xinyuan Gaoyan was indeed very strong, but Zhan Zong wasn't an ordinary person either. His bloodline power was equally domineering. Moreover, with Palace Master Yi joining forces, they would definitely win. Zhang Yi nodded, and the two of them watched the battle. At this moment, as the sovereign lords started fighting, the 8-winged black dragon from the Xinyuan family also went berserk. It flapped its huge wings that were filled with power, creating a terrifying storm as it tangled with the demonic aureole. The two beast monarchs had the same cultivation level, infinitely close to the sovereign lord level. They fought fiercely. However, the city descended into chaos. As Xianyuan Gaoyan activated the second clan protecting formation, the 4 pillars collapsed, and the beast spirits were awakened. Enormous creatures that seemed to have come from ancient times walked around, emitting terrifying power that could destroy the heavens and earth. Without needing anyone to give the order, all the remaining members of the Xianyuan family in the city immediately ran towards the divine temple. Only by hiding in the divine temple would they be able to avoid being killed by the beast spirits. Once these beast spirits were awakened, they would attack indiscriminately. Anything that emitted the aura of life would be attacked by them. This was also the reason why Xianyuan Gaoyan didn't open it easily. Unless the survival of his family was in danger, he wouldn't open it. More importantly, the price of awakening the beast spirit was too great. The 4 pillars that towered into the clouds were entirely composed of celestial crystals. They were the foundation of the Xianyuan royal family and had been stored for a long time. Now that they had collapsed and exhausted all their spiritual power, the foundation of thousands of years was gone. For the Xianyuan royal family, the loss was extremely heavy. Otherwise, Xianyuan Gaoyan wouldn't have watched Xianyuan Wuing being chased by Qin Hao and not open the formation. It was because he really couldn't open it. But now all of this was no longer important. Xiao Han's gaze fell on the city. All the members of the Xianyuan royal family were rushing towards the divine temple, ignoring the enemies chasing behind them. This included the few remaining Emperor Yuan of the Xianyuan family. They turned into streams of light and flew towards the divine temple. The Knight Luo Palace and Zheng clan experts didn't chase after them. They were powerless to do so now. Xianyuan Gaoyan killed 3 of them in an instant, and one of them had his large body shattered. The Zhan clan experts also didn't chase after them. The aura of the beast spirit in the city was too strong. Although it wasn't at the emperor level, it wasn't weaker than the 8-winged black dragon and the 8-winged demon aureole. If they weren't careful, they might die under the attacks of the beast spirit. The situation in the city now became a bit funny. The 2 armies were running in opposite directions at the same time, like 2 tides separating. The moment they were threatened by the beast spirit, they behaved so tacitly. At present, there were only 4 people in the city who didn't move. Zhan Wenjie and Xinyuan Wuba fell into a frenzy. Sword lights slashed and halberd lights flew, wanting to take each other's lives. The battle was so intense that they entered a state of selflessness. The 2 of them didn't seem to notice that the beast spirit had awakened. In addition, the light of the arch tribulation fell and drowned a body. That body didn't have any aura at first, but now it gradually glowed with golden white arch light, becoming more and more sacred. Qin Hao was still transcending the tribulation. He didn't leave, so naturally, Su Jin wouldn't leave either. Even though the city was in chaos, the beast spirit's huge body blocked the sun, and its shadow shrouded Su Jin's head. He still stood firmly in place to protect Qin Hao. Even if the beast spirit's huge palm came crashing down, he wouldn't hesitate to block it. Pucci, a mass of arch light burst, and blood splattered in all directions. Emperor Yuan of a certain branch of the Xianyuan family was about to fly into the temple. But halfway through, a terrifying dragon claw stomped down and crushed him to the ground. The speed at which the dragon claw fell seemed to be very slow, but Emperor Yuan's flying speed was extremely fast. However, he was shot down halfway. As if destined, the dragon claw pierced through his physical body and directly crushed his divine soul. Roar! Amidst the smoke and dust, a ferocious dragon head poked out and roared towards the sky. The sound waves radiated all the way, and the sky trembled. Immediately, this dragon saw a beam of light falling from the sky and was immediately attracted. In the next second, its huge body slowly moved in the direction of Qin Hao. Sun God's gaze fell, and the disappearance of the Arch aura naturally attracted his attention. Seeing that Emperor Yuan of the Xinyuan family was killed by the beast spirit, he didn't feel the slightest ripple in his heart. But at this moment, his attention shifted along with the beast spirit and also fell on the light of tribulation. That pair of sharp golden eyes penetrated the light of tribulation and saw Qin Hao inside at a glance. Immediately, Sun God stretched out his hand, and the power of Tao validation swept out. With a flip of his palm, a wisp of the arch Tao fire flew down and blasted towards the light of tribulation. Qin Hao wanted to transcend the tribulation and become an arch. He wouldn't allow it. Swoosh! A wisp of Tao validation soar energy was born at the same time. The platinum light was incomparably intense, and it flew closely behind the Tao fire. Break! Makamanji spat out a voice. With his mind, he controlled the sword energy to pierce into the Tao fire. Accompanied by the raging sword light, the Tao fire was instantly torn into pieces. Sun God raised his head and looked at Makamanji. As if issuing a final warning, he said coldly, "In this battle, I will only kill one person. After killing one person, you would leave." Now that Qin Hao was dead, he wouldn't attack anyone else. Whether the Knight Luo Palace and the Zheng clan wanted to destroy the Xinyuan family or dominate the southern region, it had nothing to do with him. Don't be so obsessed. Makamanji's pupils shrank slightly. Like a sword light piercing towards Sun God, his tone began to turn cold, as if warning the other party. In this endless imperial city battlefield, anyone could die, but only Qin Hao couldn't die. Sun God could kill anyone, but if he killed Qin Hao, Makamanji wouldn't stand by and watch. It wasn't just for Qin Hao, but also for Sun God and the blazing Sun Temple. Makamanji cherished this friendship and didn't want to see Sun God repeat Xinyuan Gaoyan's mistakes. Otherwise, tomorrow, the sacred temple and the sacred mountain would be like this scene below. Makamanji, you disappoint me. Sun God let out a sigh. Boom, 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 boom. More than 10 lava giants stepped in the void, and the rules of fists broke through the air and blasted towards the Sword Emperor. All-directional sword destruction. Makamanji roared, and the light of the way around him shone brightly, blinding everyone's eyes. The terrifying sword was swallowed up the sky, and with a thought, he drew out his sword and turned it into more than 10 giant swords that circled around him, stabbing towards the lava giants. The sword light shattered the fists and struck the fire spirit true body. Boom! The sky was completely turned into a sea of fire, and Sun God's golden hair hung upside down as if it was burning, turning into a sacred flame. He grasped the air, and the sea of fire surged. Many fire spirit fighting souls appeared and merged with the lava giants. At this moment, the great path in the sky was penetrated by the will of the way fire. I have no choice but to borrow the sword from the heavens. Makamanji's spiritual soul felt like it was melting, and the great path fire had already threatened his life. He raised his sword above his head, and a beam of sword chi burst out, breaking through the clouds and piercing through the great path fire. The sword chi was connected to the sky. Emperor Luo, Emperor Ming, and Li Yuan saw this, and their eyes widened, and they retreated far away from the battle. Seeing that the Xinyuan family was about to be finished, Makamanji and Sun God were fighting again. Swish! 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 The sword matrix fell and collided with the great path fire, and the sky was filled with sword chi and flames. Sword Emperor and Sun God fell into a fierce battle in the blink of an eye. Their movements were too fast, and almost no one could see clearly. They could only see countless sword chi being constantly melted, and at the same time, the great path fire was rapidly weakening. At this moment, the warriors of the southern region who were watching the battle were numb. Two more Imperial Lords had fallen into a life-and-death battle. However, surprisingly, the upper echelons of the Sword Sect and the Sacred Temple did not make any more moves. The people of the two sects kept their distance very quietly, watching their Imperial Lords carefully. Boom! Crack! In the city, the light of calamity of the Great Path continued, and waves of calamity power bombarded Qin Hao's body. In the light of calamity, Qin Hao's imperial qi was surging more and more. It's the 40th and 20th. Su Jin stood guard and counted silently. There were 36 tribulations of the Great Path. Why was Qin Hao's tribulation different from the others? Logically speaking, it should be over. At this moment, the corner of Su Jin's mouth twitched slightly. He suddenly thought that Qin Hao himself seemed to have the ability to summon the Imperial Tribulation. If he summoned his own Imperial Tribulation, plus the tribulations that Xin Yuan Wuying did not survive. Indeed, 36 tribulations were not enough. Even if 42 tribulations were blasted down, there were still 12 more. Su Jin was considering whether or not he should also try summoning another Empyrean Tribulation. But it seemed that he already had a perfect Imperial physique. Buzz! A huge black shadow shrouded down, and the terrifying aura of an evil dragon filled the air. It entered Su Jin's spiritual soul, causing his heart to tremble violently. Guardian Beast Spirit. Su Jin raised his head and happened to meet a pair of huge dragon eyes. It was a pair of empty eyes, as terrifying as a hole. This was troublesome. Qin Hao was still bathing in the Imperial Tribulation. At this time, it could not be interrupted. Otherwise, he would not be able to build a perfect Imperial physique. Just then, the guardian beast spirit of the Xianyuan family came over. This pressure was extremely strong, approaching the level of the Imperial Lord. Even as a disciple of the Divine Palace, Su Jin was far from being able to compete with it. Whoosh! Without giving him any time to think, a terrifying huge dragon claw stepped down. The sharp light of the claw tore the space apart and followed the light of calamity to bury Qin Hao. Su Jin looked up at the sharp claw, and his soul seemed to be deeply pierced. He could not even summon the strength to resist. He gritted his teeth and roared, "Senior sister." Su Jin's body and mind trembled as he faced Qin Hao's the arch aura head-on. He felt as if his divine soul was about to be crushed. He had just entered the arch realm and was only at Emperor Yuan's first level. Yet, he already felt as if he was facing an Imperial Lord. It was actually so shocking and terrifying. "I'm sorry, I just couldn't control my emotions and clench my fists slightly." Qin Hao was also frightened and hurriedly dispersed the indestructible samsara technique. Just now, he could feel the fear in Su Jin's heart, and he didn't doubt that if he wrapped Su Jin's the archbody slightly, it would be enough to instantly tear Su Jin's the archbody apart. Su Jin's face stiffened. When the aura of the indestructible samsara technique dissipated from Qin Hao's body, the soul-tearing oppression disappeared. He walked over slowly and said, "Big brother, your state of becoming the arch seems to be completely different from Wuk and Sister Xiaohan." When Su Jin faced Shou Wuk and Xiaohan, he didn't feel any threat. In essence, he was also in the arch. Soul power and Dao intent are different, right? Qin Hao smiled, raised his hand, and patted Su Jin's shoulder twice. The soul in Su Jin's body was Gooden. In the illusory palace, he called him Big Brother. Now that he came out with him, Qin Hao was his only family. Just now, when the beast spirits were pressuring him from all directions, he didn't retreat half a step and firmly protected Qin Hao. Qin Hao saw all of this clearly. "What do we do now?" Su Jin asked. In this battle, the Xinyuan royal family was utterly defeated. Only a few experts escaped into the temple, while the rest of the army was killed by the beast spirits. The only fly in the ointment was that Chang Lo was still alive. However, he wouldn't live for long. Qin Hao looked at the battle and immediately looked at the top of the sky. In a large space sealed by haze, there were extremely violent collisions. At this moment, the Red Lotus fiery eyes flashed. A pair of scarlet eyes pierced through the void like arrows and shot into the haze. Sealed by Yi Ning Hong's The Arch Technique. Although he couldn't see the details inside, Qin Hao could still recognize the silhouettes of the three figures. From the aura, it was easier to recognize. Zhang Guanghe, the leader of the Zhan sect, had inherited the Zhan clan's blade Dao. His domineering blade was wide open, and every strike had the spirit to sweep the world. Yi Ning Hong's cultivation came from the Night Demon Emperor, and she was an expert who specialized in the Dao of assassination. Qin Hao saw that she seemed to have merged with the haze. The space was filled with her aura, and he couldn't accurately pinpoint her location. However, she would often attack from unexpected places and suddenly give the opponent a fatal blow. Qin Hao couldn't see how serious Xinyuan Gaoyan's injury was, but every time a light flashed, the Emperor of Nanao's aura would drop a little. Chapter 1593. There were 9 forms in one blade, and the 9 forms combined into one. It was the ultimate secret of the blade of the clan slayer. The blade will merge with the great path and exploded in an instant. Its power was terrifying. At this moment, the space in front of Xinyuan Wuba was cut in half. The blade light was blazing, and its endless power was like a giant wave, swallowing everything. It made people feel as if they had fallen into the bottom of the ocean, and they felt desperate. Xinyuan Wuba roared, and the majestic emperor's light raged around him. The great path's gravity sealed the space. His burly body was hit by the blade wave, but he did not move. His halberd burst with platinum light, and the precepts merged into it. He stabbed forward, spewing out an endless stream of gravity. The giant wave was suppressed, and the blade light could not cut through. "You've done your best to force me to use the extreme blade." Zhan Wenjie pointed forward with his left finger, and the extreme blade's precepts flew out and merged into the blade. In an instant, the murderous aura in front of him surged. Giant waves surged and exploded, shattering the precept's gravity seal. The sharp blade light slashed down. Swoosh! The blade cut into Xinyuan Wuba's body in the blink of an eye. A silver thread-like blade mark slashed across his chest from his left shoulder to the lower corner of his right abdomen. Xinyuan Wuba looked down at his body. At this moment, the blade will that shrouded his head dissipated, and the surrounding space became extremely quiet. There was no longer any murderous aura. However, this blade cut into his body, and his internal organs and meridians were all shattered by the blade will. This slash also cut into his spiritual soul at the same time. A powerful opponent. In his life, other than Xinyuan Gaoyan, Zhan Wenjie was the first expert who could kill Xinyuan Wuba. The Western Liang War King, Duan Zhanfei, was far from this level. "You've won, but the one who dies may not be me." Xinyuan Wuba suddenly looked up, and there was a terrifying madness in his eyes. A mysterious flow of light surrounded his body. His body, which should have been cut in two, was surrounded by the flow of light. The blade mark on his chest was healing at a visible rate. At the same time, an extremely dangerous aura burst out, covering Emperor Xuanyuan's halberd. The halberd's emperor's weapon's power spread, and it was completely covered in a layer of platinum. Xinyuan Wuba held the halberd and rushed forward, stabbing it into Zhang Wenji's chest. Swoosh! The halberd pierced through his body and into his heart. Zhang Wenji was stunned. Why? Xianyuan Wuba was killed by Yi Futian's extreme blade rule, but his monarch body was extraordinary. Instead of dying, Xianyuan Wuba unleashed even more power. Why? Zhang Wenji couldn't figure it out. But at the critical moment, Emperor Yuan reacted quickly. Risking his divine soul being injured, Xianyuan Wushuang gathered his vital qi like a madman, wanting to kill Zhang Wenji. However, at that moment, a sense of danger that made his heart palpitate rushed toward him. Xianyuan Wushuang turned his head, and the scene that came into his eyes terrified him. He saw a sword light burning with billowing demonic flames flying toward him. As it flew past, a deep gully was created on the ground. The sword light tore through everything and was wrapped in a terrifying storm. This suffocating killing aura was even more terrifying than Xianyuan Gaoyan's. Xianyuan Wushuang had no chance to dodge. His eyes widened, and he turned his halberd to stab at the sword light. Clang! A cluster of violent sparks exploded, and the halberd was shaken off by the wind. At that moment, the scene seemed to be still. Xianyuan Wushuang's hands were empty, and the scenes of the past appeared in his mind. He, the Southern Proud Crown Prince, had too many glorious achievements in his life, whether it was within his family or when he wandered around the various sects in the southern region. The places where he left his footprints were branded with his glory. In the process, all the geniuses and heroes became his stepping stones, paving the way for his rise. Xianyuan Wushuang was disdainful of the enemy's reverence. He was also surrounded by countless peerless beauties. However, none of them could enter his eyes. The only person he pursued was the Southern Proud Emperor. Xianyuan Gaoyan had worked hard all his life to become the perfect successor of the Southern Proud Emperor. He believed that one day he would no longer have to look up at his father's back. He would definitely be able to stand at the same height as his father. But why? He had not become the sovereign lord, but he was going to die on the path of his ideals. And the person who killed him was Qin Hao, a person who was not qualified to make him look at him seriously. No. Boom. The still scene was shattered, and, at the same time, Xianyuan Wushuang's body was shattered. When the flaming sword light swept past, it easily tore his body apart. The Southern Proud Crown Prince was blown to pieces in the raging wind. His divine soul fell and was strangled, and he let out an earth-shattering howl. The howl was so tragic that it resounded through the heavens and the earth, straight into the ninth heaven, and seemed to spread throughout the entire southern region. At that moment, the entire battlefield was silent. Even the Muyun clan and the Sun God clan both stopped. All the sovereign lords looked down, and the scene in front of them made their hearts tighten. So strong? Makamanji exclaimed. He could no longer imagine how Qin Hao, who had just become a sovereign, could shoot Xianyuan Wushuang, who was a 6th-level sovereign. When his gaze fell on the arrow that flew by, he felt as if his soul had been penetrated. Impossible. The sun god lost his composure. Then, a ray of emperor light shook up the dust, and it was reflected from the ground into the divine palace. Stop! Yi Ninghong's body was like a pitch-black dagger. The emperor light tore through the space, and she chased after Xianyuan Gaoyan. She would not give him a chance to enter the divine palace. Be sovereign, be loyal to me. Xianyuan Gaoyan let out a cry that sounded like a cry. Roar! Above the sky, a boundlessly majestic giant pressed down. It flapped its 8 wings, and the black dragon bee sovereign of the Xianyuan royal family stepped down. It used its flesh and blood to block Yi Ninghong, separating her from Xianyuan Gaoyan. Those who stop me will die. Yi Ninghong's emperor light condensed into a sharp pitch-black dagger. With her emperor body as the blade, the great path of rules circulated, and she continued to move forward. The black dragon let out a frenzied roar. The dragon's aura shook, and its dragon claws pierced forward, clashing with the tip of the pitch-black dagger. Chapter 1594. Between heaven and earth, there seemed to be a destructive storm. The dragon's aura suppressed the heavens, and all beasts prostrated themselves. The black dragon was like a true dragon king that wanted to bury the entire imperial city. The dragon's aura wreaked havoc on its enormous body. Its claw light grabbed at the black dagger, wanting to shatter it. Yinninghong's monarch body was like a dagger. Surging killing aura burst out and pierced into the storm. It withstood the dragon's aura bombardment and pierced towards the black dragon's body bit by bit. The black dragon's roar became more and more violent. The dragon's claw was unable to grab the dagger, unable to shatter the Dao protection of the Dao, proving great emperor. Although the Xian Yuan imperial family's guardian beast monarch was infinitely close to the emperor level, it had not reached that step yet. It could only watch as the dagger light pierced through the dragon's scales and gradually sank into its flesh. However, the dragon's roar that was able to enter the divine soul made Yinninghong feel very uncomfortable. The black dragon's body was tyrannical and was good at attacking. In a frontal battle, she could not display the advantage of her assassination Dao. Screech! At this moment, a huge black shadow swept down from the void. The eight-winged demon Oriole let out a shrill cry as it rushed into the storm. Its sharp claws reached out, and its mountain-like body stomped heavily on the black dragon's head. This stomp caused the void to tremble and the ground to sink. The sharp claws emitted endless radiance and pierced into the black dragon's head. Blood splattered, and the latter let out an extremely painful roar. With the demon Oriole's help, sharing part of the black dragon's aura, Yinninghong turned into a dagger. In an instant, it shone brightly. With a crack, it forcefully pierced through the dragon's claw and nailed into the black dragon's body. Dao, proving dilly, swept out. His killing Dao intent penetrated the black dragon's body. Dense rays of light pierced through the black dragon's body. Just at this moment, Zhang Guang, his tyrannical blade, slashed down from the sky. The Dragon Slayer blade was like layers of huge waves overlapping each other. It forcefully shattered the dragon's aura and actually cut the black dragon into two. Roar! The saber light slashed out, and the dragon roared. The beast monarch of the Xian Yuan imperial family was outnumbered, and its huge dragon body fell down. In the imperial city, the dragon chi dispersed. At this moment, the demonic Oriole let out a sharp cry, as if venting the emotions that had been suppressed in her heart for many years. Flapping her 8 wings, she flew into the sky and circled around. In her claws, she grabbed a sparkling object. It was the Emperor's core that she had taken out from the black dragon's body. The Emperor's light was incomparably divine. She directly swallowed it into her stomach.